We begin this conversation by expressing our sincere empathy to the Rohingyas, one of the most persecuted communities in the world. We deeply appreciate Bangladesh for showing courage and compassion in opening its borders for Rohingyas and providing them with shelter and protection. This presentation today has its origins in a research project in 2017-2018. On behalf of that research team, I wish to acknowledge our partners, the Institution of Diploma Engineers Bangladesh and the ASA Philippines Foundation for their financial support. We also give a special thanks to His Excellency Sufia Rahman, Bangladesh High Commissioner to Australia and the former ambassador to Myanmar, when this crisis unfolded, for his intellectual and moral support and his encouragement for this project. During our research, 3,300 Rohingya households and over 160,000 participants were, 16,000 participants were interviewed. We believe this to be the largest sample refugee independent research as primary data undertaken. This project culminated in the publication in 2018 of the report, Forced Migration of Rohingya, The Untold Experience. It has been downloaded more than 50,000 times and 1,000 hard copies have been distributed around the world. I also want to acknowledge the presence today of Professor Masadur Rahman, one of our research team members who is present with us. I'm pleased now to introduce Professor Christine Jubb of Swinburne University. Among her many accomplishments, she was a member of the Australian Auditing and Assurance Standards Boards, the chair of its research committee, and a member of the board of the Accounting and Finance Association of Australia and New Zealand for 6 years. I now turn the chair over to Professor Jubb, who will moderate this opening session, setting the scene and background. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. And could I go on, Henry? Thank you very much. So a warm welcome to everybody. It's a great pleasure to have you all join us. As is our custom in Australia, I too acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which Swinburne is located. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I also pay my respect to the martyrs of the 1952 movement and the 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War, and the father of the Bangladesh nation. So it's my pleasure now to introduce each of the dignitaries who are joining us for this webinar. We're very thrilled that they each could agree to come and introduce themselves and talk a little about the Rohingya issue. First of all, the Honourable Jason Wood, Assistant Minister for Customs, Community Safety and Multicultural Affairs, Government of Australia. Assistant Minister Wood, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you very much. I've got a short speech. Would you like me to make that now or afterwards?
Yes, perhaps you'd go now.
Okay, thanks very much, and it's great to be on here. And I'm going into isolation here in Melbourne tomorrow because I'm travelling to Canberra. So my best wishes to everyone listening from around the world and during this awful COVID pandemic. We'll get through this. First of all, thank you for Dr. Mashan Habib and the organisers of this webinar for the invitation to join you today as an observer. And can I just say, with my role as Assistant Minister, my responsibilities include Australian Border Force with Minister Peter Dutton. Of interest to you would be modern slavery, and on other aspects including firearms, customs, including import and export, and of course multicultural affairs. When it comes to the wider international issues, obviously that falls under the sphere of foreign affairs with Senator the Honourable Maurice Payne. So I won't be making comments outside of my portfolio, but obviously I've got great interest in what's happening with this event and world events and what you're trying to achieve here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak at this event and acknowledge the expertise of people participating in this panel, including the Bangladeshi government representatives, the Honourable Sahariya Adam MP, Honourable State Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Masud bin Mohan, Honourable Foreign Secretary. I look forward to hearing from many experts who are participating in these discussions and learning more about the complex issues and perspectives surrounding the ongoing Rohingya crisis. I note several participants are based in Australia and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our lands, their elders past and present. As Assistant Minister for Customs, Community Safety and Multicultural Affairs, I have a keen interest in multicultural matters globally, especially those impacting our regions. And of course, this is an issue of great concern. The humanitarian crisis in Myanmar and Bangladesh is the largest and most complex in our region. As an estimated 2.3 million people are thought to be in need of humanitarian assistance, I acknowledge the efforts of the People's Republic of Bangladesh in their response to the Rohingya crisis. Australia has a strong and enduring bilateral relationship with Bangladesh spanning almost 50 years, and Australia has provided life-saving humanitarian support to improve the situation for affected populations. This has included providing more than 260 million in humanitarian assistance in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, and Myanmar since August 2017. Australia's humanitarian assistance provided essential food, shelter, clean water, education, health services, and protection of displaced people and host communities in Bangladesh and Myanmar. Australia is also supporting Bangladesh to respond to impacts COVID-19, including the camps at Cox's Bazar. Australia has provided assistance to ensure existing vulnerabilities are not exacerbated by COVID-19. This includes supporting the establishment of treatment and quarantine facilities, additional water and sanitisation infrastructure, and support and delivery of essential health services and public messaging for refugees and the host community. Australia is committed to ongoing and collaborative engagement with regional partners and an international community in addressing the current crisis. I look forward to hearing the discussions and viewpoints today. I trust these will contribute to deliberations around achieving a long-term and durable solution to enable displaced Rohingya people to return to Myanmar when circumstances allow. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate. And also I believe that Philip Ruddock is on here later on tonight. I believe the former Immigration Minister to Australia. I just have to acknowledge the Honourable Philip Ruddock. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Jason Wood. Next, I'd like to introduce His Excellency Sahariya Alam MP, the Honourable State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Government of Bangladesh. Mr. Alam has been consecutively elected 3 times as the Member of the National Parliament, and he was first sworn in 2014 as the State Minister for Foreign Affairs, and then assumed the office again in 2018. He has acted as the Vice Chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change, Education, Poverty Reduction, as well as several other roles, and the Bangladesh Development Forum. Mr. Alam, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Professor Christine. Thanks to His Excellency Jason Wood MP. I know he's traveling, but thanks for his intervention. The Honourable Assistant Minister for Customs, Community Safety and Multicultural Affairs of Australia, Foreign Secretary Masud Momen, Dr. Shami Ahmed, our colleague and our leader in Bangladesh Awami League Central Committee, the Secretary for International Affairs, Professor Henry Pollard, Professor Christine, and our other friends for your presence at this opening segment of today's webinar on Rohingya and their repatriations. Out of only humanitarian consideration, our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina took a very bold and historic humanitarian decision to temporarily shelter around 1 million persecuted Rohingya in Bangladesh. That she has saved thousands of Rohingya lives from unfortunate deaths as well as safeguarding the region from a possible human catastrophe. Unfortunately, Bangladesh is now suffering for her humanitarian gesture. We have sustained irreparable loss of our biodiversity in that region. Cultivable lands were lost, demographic balance and environment degradation and socio-cultural cohesion in Cox's Bazar district. Rohingya is not only a crisis, in fact, Rohingya is not a crisis at all between Bangladesh and Myanmar. It's a crisis between Myanmar and her own people. And the only solution obviously lies in return of those Rohingyas. And obviously, before anyone mentioned it, Bangladesh voluntarily said that it will have to be safe, dignified, sustainable, and voluntary. About 3 years of signing bilateral instruments between two foreign ministers of Bangladesh and Myanmar have passed. Still, there is no visible sign of creating conducive environment in the Rakhine state, and thereby two repatriation efforts so far turned unsuccessful. It's a matter of utter dismay that we have so far handed over to them a list of nearly 600,000 Rohingya for verification in 5 phases, of which they have cleared only 10,000. Yes, you have heard me right. Only 10,000 out of 600,000. And those are also termed as persons resided in Myanmar by Myanmar authority. After the 4th round of joint working group meeting in May 2019, the decision of the 5th joint working group meeting is still pending with Myanmar for more than a year now, year and a half to be honest. All those prove the lack of sincere political will of the Myanmar government for repatriation. And today, Australian university, think tanks, academia, the government came together to talk about repatriation. And see, we do not have any Myanmar participation in this discussion even. There were none in my experience the last 4 years or so, apart from 1 or 2 meetings during the sideline of UN. And obviously during our bilateral engagement. We haven't seen any government representation, any think tank from Myanmar who is stepping out or attending these discussions or making any intervention whatsoever remotely even. However, Bangladesh is thankful to the international community for their continued engagement and support to ensure humanitarian assistance, accountability, and justice. They should also raise their concerted voice for compensation and repatriation as an incontrovertible acknowledgement of Myanmar's role in the violation of Rohingya human rights. To this effect, the international community must remain seized with the issue and actively engage with Myanmar in sustainable repatriation process through effective maneuver of their leverage vis-a-vis Myanmar. And we see many countries, engaging Myanmar, supporting them militarily, economically, and that's fine with us. But we do not see that those countries are using that as a leverage to negotiate on behalf of this unfortunate million and probably 500,000 still residing and another nearly 1 million scattered around the globe. In the conclusion, I thank the International Consortium of Universities, Australia, and Canadian Research Center, IDEB of Bangladesh, Institute of Diploma Engineers of Bangladesh, and other concerned who has organized today's event. And I hope that something meaningful and fruitful and useful will come out after today's event. Thank you very much. Jai Bangla, Jai Bangla.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alam. Next, I'd like to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Masood bin Momen, Foreign Secretary, Government of Bangladesh.
Thank you.
Yes, please say a few words.
Thank you, Professor Christine, our moderator. And earlier, I think webinar was inaugurated by Professor Pollard, Honorable Assistant Minister Jason Wood, Honorable State Minister, Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, His Excellency Mr. Shahriar Alam MP, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon from here in Dhaka. I first of all thank the organizers for the timely webinar. It is unfortunate that even after 3 years of deportation from Rakhine, the Rohingyas are still suffering in refugee camps in Bangladesh and also in the squalid open camps in Rakhine. While Bangladesh is burdened with a serious challenge for her generosity and for rising to the call of humanity, there is a tendency to look the other way on part of many in the international community and regional countries. On the positive side, the International Court of Justice has granted provisional measures sought by the Gambia against Myanmar. Newer confessions and evidences of atrocities are coming to public knowledge, and I hope will be examined by the International Criminal Court. This accountability at the international courts is already compelling Myanmar to pursue some domestic actions through new court martials. Another one announced on 14 September. Even the domestic process called ICOE, despite its many flaws, has suggested further criminal investigation. Myanmar's president's office has accepted that war crimes were committed by Myanmar forces. These developments attest to the argument that retributive justice for atrocity crimes on the Rohingya can yield results and can be channeled to influence the friends of Myanmar. But accountability alone will not solve all the problems of the Rohingya, which must be found inside Myanmar through safe and dignified return to Rakhine and reintegration with necessary rights. There are still little signs that Myanmar will not give up so easily. As we speak, our forces are intensifying so-called clearance operations either against Rakhines or Muslims in Rakhine and Chin state. The recent conflicts as well as the outbreak of COVID-19 are being used as excuses to avoid repatriation. In fact, Myanmar has not been responding to repeated calls for JWG meeting long before the COVID pandemic, last meeting held way back in May 2019. Myanmar sought to engage Bangladesh on repatriation without any material change on the ground needed for voluntary repatriation and without any pathway towards reintegration into Myanmar society. There is no provision of basic rights for the returnees, no guarantee for conducive atmosphere, for safety, for livelihoods, for lives and ensure livelihood. Dear participants, repatriation depends significantly on progress in the change of attitude of Myanmar's domestic stakeholders and her protectors. The accountability process at the ICJ and its verdict could be used to formulate a partial remedy to concerns of the Rohingya community on safety and security on return. But Myanmar shows no signs of stopping brazen violation of rights and of civilians in Rakhine, despite the court's watchful eye. This makes security assurance the most important aspect for sustainable return and reintegration. The Rohingya victims, after having suffered persecution for decades and genocidal campaign in 2016-17 period, cannot be expected to trust the same organized Myanmar forces and their accomplices for safety. In this context, discussion on neutral and external protecting powers become relevant. Many options for this could be considered. Safe zones and corridors are some practicable options. International civilian monitoring of safety and security in Rakhine are no longer a wish, but rather a necessity. Ladies and gentlemen, as for livelihood, they need support from international community as their houses were razed to the ground, properties pillaged, fields destroyed, businesses lost. Rohingya returnees must be given assistance not only to commence their livelihood, but to also compensate for their economic losses and damages. It is timely that this webinar seeks to deliberate on this and help create better understanding on restitution and compensation for the Rohingya. But beyond assistance, the Rohingya also need redressal of their mental trauma. They need an appropriate satisfaction in the form of discovery of truth an acceptance of culpability from the violators, and even an apology for assuaging their hard feeling. This will be needed for a reconciliation among ethnic communities in Rakhine. In other parts of the world, we have examples of such processes. And if the UN can initiate with the help of regional powers, that could be a welcome development. I sincerely hope that distinguished participants and experts would be able to take the discourse forward on these two important aspects towards durable solution of the Rohingya problem. I wish you all an open and intense deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bin Moen. Next, we have Dr. Shami Ahmad, International Affairs Secretary, Bangladesh Awami League. Dr. Ahmed has master's degrees from both Dhaka University and the University of Melbourne, and a PhD in disaster management and gender policy, and has served in senior positions in international organizations. Dr. Ahmed, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Christine. Honorable Jason Wood, MP, Assistant Minister of Customs, Community Safety and Multicultural Affairs, Australia. Honorable Shahriar Alam, MP, State Minister of Foreign Affairs, People Republics of Bangladesh. Honorable Secretary, Dr. Masood bin Momen. Distinguished keynote speakers, panel members, and audience from all over the world. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. I pay my respect to the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and 3 million martyrs during our great liberation war in 1971. I also appreciate the current leadership of Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of People Republics of Bangladesh, for her visionary leadership to pursue the dream of the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. On behalf of my party, Bangladesh Awami League, and people of Bangladesh, convey our respect to all Australians, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nation across the Australia, their elders, ancestors, cultures, and heritage. Today's topic is of significance of Bangladesh and South Asia region for economic, social, and security issues. A special thanks to the organizer, Dr. Mohsin Habib, Professor Christine Job, Professor Henry Pollard, for organizing this important event and bringing together reputed experts on this issue. Rohingyas, an ethnic minority that evolved and grew in Arakan over centuries and was habited in Burma long before the independence of Burma, or Myanmar, whatever you said. However, Rohingyas are considered to be the most persecuted people in the world. Rohingyas faced recurring military crackdown and fled from Myanmar in significant numbers first in 1978 and then 1991, 1992, and then 2012, 2015, 2016, and finally 2017. This led to the recent influx of Rohingyas in Bangladesh, and probably the number could have reached in 1.4 million. Rohingyas located in a temporary, dangerous, and unstable areas of hill tracts in Cox's Bazar district. The visionary leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, the mother of humanity on humanitarian grounds, agreed to open the Bangladesh border to save the million Rohingya refugees from the unprecedented brutality of the military crackdown in Myanmar. International communities have praised the courageous and humanitarian leadership of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for opening the border and accepting the Rohingyas. The people of Bangladesh have wholeheartedly responded and supported the Rohingyas as much or beyond their ability. Dr. Habib and his team have conducted the world's largest sample refugee studies and revealed sobering atrocity data committed by the Myanmar authorities against Rohingyas and are responsible for the 25,000 killing, 19,000 rape, 43,000 gunshot wounds, and 116,000 Rohingyas were beaten. Despite examination by the International Court of Justice, ICJ, and the International Criminal Court, ICC, of the atrocity crimes, Myanmar shows no sign of respecting international demands of accountability. Along with the burden of 1.1 million refugees, today Bangladesh is facing unprecedented pressure of sustained cross-border threat from Myanmar, increasingly subjected to guns trafficking of drugs and arms and other illegal activities from Myanmar. This crisis not only poses short-term threat to Bangladesh economy progression as well as to the political stability of the South Asian region. Therefore, this is an urgent need for the international community, including Australia, to join forces to support Bangladesh to find a durable solution to this crisis. I wish all the best to the International Research Consortium led by Dr. Habib and for their research endeavors on research information policy development in this area. Thank you all once again. Joy Bangla, Joy Bangabandhu, long live Bangladesh.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Before throwing back to Professor Pallard, I'd just like to talk about the research that Dr. Ahmed referred to there and some of the challenges, particularly Dr. Habib faced in undertaking that research. Most of the research was done in January and February of 2018, not long after the flight of the Rohingya from Myanmar to Bangladesh. So it was a very short period in which to organize all the necessary approvals, create the questionnaire survey, train research assistants of both genders to make sure that males interviewed males, etc., and females interviewed females, create the stratified sample and interview over 3,300 household heads representing 16,000 individuals, and then extrapolating the results from that to the wider population of, at that time, 800,000 who had fled to Bangladesh. I just wanted to give you some background to the challenges that were faced in this research and how speed was of the essence to capture the memories of the Rohingya and how harrowing it was for the researchers, the research assistants particularly, to take their stories, but their stories need to be told. And to all of you who've, in your few words, have mentioned the importance of keeping this issue alive, not being forgotten and out of sight, out of mind. That is exactly what we're trying to do. So with those few words about the background, I'd like now to pass back to Professor Henri Pallard to introduce our next speaker. Thank you, Henri.
Thank you very much, Professor Job, and also thank you very much to all our panelists for this opening session, which has set the stage for the discussion, the presentation, the discussion that we will have today on repatriation and compensation for sustainable return of the Rohingya refugees. And we understand the challenges that this project faces. I will now turn the panel over to our next moderator, the Ambassador Sophia Rahman. I would like to introduce him by saying that prior to his appointment as the Bangladesh High Commissioner to Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji, Ambassador Sophia Rahman was Bangladesh Ambassador to Myanmar from 2014 to 2017 and has knowledge of intimate knowledge of the issues that we'll be discussing today. In Myanmar, he was intimately associated with managing the fallout of the violence in Rakhine in 2016 and 2017, and was part of intricate negotiations on development of the framework for return of refugees and forcibly displaced persons. We particularly, we on the research team, we particularly acknowledge his intellectual and moral support for our Rohingya research and also for his unparalleled support. And so I welcome Ambassador Shafir Rahman and to moderate this next session of this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pollard. Let me begin by thanking the organizers for this timely webinar. And before I proceed, let me once again welcome all the participants from all over the world to this thematic session on safety and security for return for the Rohingyas back to Rakhine. We had a wonderful opening session where we have heard from important speakers, including Minister Shahriar Alam and Honorable Minister Shahriar Alam from Bangladesh and Honorable Minister Jason Wood from Australia. We have benefited immensely from their observations and views. We have also heard respected Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh, Mr. Masud bin Momen, who has covered generally the challenges of repatriation when Myanmar shows very little sign of redressing the difficult situation that the Rohingya fled 3 years back. Given my own association with the crisis and my personal experience of working with Myanmar stakeholders, I often seek to delve deeper into the subject, but today I am your moderator and certainly will try to refrain from bothering you with my views and understanding in the interest of saving time. In the same vein, I would demand all presenters and discussants in this session to try to limit within the allocated time. We'd like to have an open discussion on the extremely critical aspect of voluntary repatriation in safety, security, and dignity. Let me say something about the format of the session. The session will first have a presentation from Mr. Muhammad Shahidul Haq, followed by 4 identified distinguished discussants who will offer their views on the subject. Time permitting, we might add 1 or 2 discussions from the interested experts and stakeholders. We will then have an open discussion, rather a chat. I request the interested persons to send us your observations in brief and burning questions that you might have. Some relevant questions will be responded to by our outstanding panels, while the rest we will try to respond later in due course. Before I proceed further, let me make some general remarks and observations on the theme of the session. Policies and practices of discrimination against the Rohingya intensified since the violence of 2012. The attacks of 2016 October offered the Myanmarese forces an excuse to apply full force and to start the brutal clearance operations. Indiscriminate and excessive use of force against civilians intensified further after the 2016 August violence. Horrified Rohingya took shelter in bushes and forests to escape such ruthless force before crossing over to Bangladesh and finally. Bangladesh informally broached the idea to the UN to create safe zones and corridors so that the civilians can take shelter for safety and do not cross over to Bangladesh. The UN in Myanmar, I must honestly say, was found not too keen in pursuing it hard with the belligerent Myanmar. In the following days and weeks, tens of thousands killed, uncountable raped, over 100,000 of homes destroyed, so that the Rohingya had no option but to leave Rakhine for life. Then Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina formally broached the concept of creation of safe zones and corridors in her speech at the UNGA in September 2017, that she followed up in her speech in 2018 also. The UN Security Council met within a couple of days and weeks, but failed to rise to the gravity of atrocities committed and appreciate the need for protection of civilians. It failed to agree on a package on halting violence, stopping outflow of the Rohingya into Bangladesh, investigating the indiscriminate use of force and violations of humanitarian laws, happened. And then we have a situation of 850,000 Rohingyas who fled to Bangladesh. In the following weeks and months, Myanmar tried many things, including airspace violation, firing, and incursion in Bangladesh territory to draw Bangladesh into a full-blown military conflict. In those difficult days, Bangladesh took the lead and engaged Myanmar to create a framework for voluntary repatriation. Bangladesh persevered to make Myanmar agreeable to provide assurance to protect human rights and fundamental rights of the stateless Rohingya who would return. An arrangement on return was signed on 23rd November 2017. There, the Myanmarese side agreed to restore normalcy in northern Rakhine, create access to basic services and livelihood, assist returnees to carry on life and livelihood as members of Myanmar society. I must say that Myanmar was totally opposed to any indication of any pathway to citizenship for the Rohingya. Myanmar also agreed to work on a comprehensive and durable solution so as to prevent recurrence of the situations for mass exodus and deportation. Myanmar confirmed its commitment to implement recommendations of the Kofi Annan Commission that covered important aspects like restoration of civil and political rights. That includes infamous 1982 citizenship law, the root cause of statelessness for the Rohingya. Thus, the arrangement had, and its subsequent instrument, physical arrangement, many commitments and contents on restoration of rights for the Rohingya. The even negotiated MOU of mid-2018, after about 7 months, could not go beyond what Bangladesh secured for the Rohingya in the framework. Despite such clearly stated obligations, in the last 3 years, we have not found any sincere effort from Myanmar to remedy the situation that the Rohingya fled for well-founded fear of persecution and threat to life. Rohingyas refused 2 attempts of repatriation and came up with many demands. That includes safety, provision of basic services, freedom of movement, recognition of ethnicity and pathway to citizenship, and even compensation. Among them, safety and security stand out in significance. The security situation in Rakhine remains unstable and has further aggravated as full-scale hostilities are taking place between Myanmar forces and Arakan army, the insurgent group. It is therefore timely that we deliberate on ways and means as to how the security situation in Rakhine could be improved, or at least we can create perceptions of improvement in security to facilitate voluntary repatriation. Dear participants, we have with us this evening an extremely knowledgeable expert on this subject, Mr. Shahidul Haq. In his 7 years stint at the Bangladesh Foreign Secretary, he dealt with this subject from all dimensions. After violence of 2012, in the lull period where Bangladesh tried to have an interdependent, mutually beneficial bilateral relations in all sectors, including security, then the violence of 2016 and 17, the forcible deportation of the Rohingya to Bangladesh, the efforts towards sustainable repatriation, and thereafter all the initiatives that Bangladesh has taken, he has been directly or indirectly involved in all of them. Without much ado, I have the honor to request Mr. Shahidul Haq to make a presentation. You have 10 minutes of time, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sufur, for being very generous. Thanks to the organizer for inviting me. Today, I will try and share with you some ideas on the safe zone, as you have learned that our Prime Minister of Bangladesh proposed this in 2017 and then subsequently carried it through in many other forums. And we would like to share 3 things. Before that, let me try and share a quick PowerPoint. Good. So, so you can see on the first page our honorable Prime Minister in the midst of the Rohingyas within a week of their arrival in 2017. Now, presentation will have 3 focus. Why do we need to start with a safe zone? And what is this idea all about? And then going to, is there a legal basis? And what is the geopolitics? So that's what we are trying to do. Why we need a safe zone to start with? I will try and go quickly to save time. There is no progress, as you have learned one after another presenters, including honorable ministers and foreign secretary, that there is no progress towards normalcy. It looks like the Myanmar government and the people do not want a peaceful life for minorities, in particular, and the Rohingyas. The fear rules the country, especially for minorities. And in the name of democracy, I think they have introduced a society which runs on fear and discrimination and persecution. Possibly we have to redefine democracy. Despite the ICG verdict, it hasn't changed. We see here and there patchworks, but no substantive change in their attitude and practice of the Myanmar government and the people. Now, there's also now new instability and insecurity because of the continuous fight with all the ethnic minorities with Tatmadaw, in particular, and bordering Bangladesh is the Arakan army. In this process, we see that the Rohingyas are getting frustrated, also agitated, and I think rightly so. So that you need to keep in the context. Otherwise, we will possibly lose the threats. No progress in the bilateral front since I left. I think the last one I had in May 2019, and since then almost no signal from other side, despite the new foreign secretary has tried to bring everybody on board. But even with the support of China, so all the efforts are going down the drain. Two failed attempts, absolute disregard to this. What are the total number? Nobody has estimate, but looks like that over 1 million in Bangladesh and about 500,000 Rohingyas in the camp, which I call concentration camp. Ambassador Sufur is here. Both of us have seen those camps very closely, not once but twice. These are very good reminder of Second World War camps, as far as I pick up from the pictures. Now, it doesn't stop there. Actually, the people who are in the camp, they are continuously threatened. And they're guarded by armed military of Myanmar. So that's the picture. Those who have seen, you can really relate between this one and the Hitler camps. So people are very unprotected, and international community is almost absent in the Rakhine. So it looks like that for over the last 1 year, that has become a sort of a false status quo. And I think Myanmar government and people wants status quo because they have done what they possibly could have. So they love status quo, but for us and the Rohingyas, that's not what we want. We want a substantive change and Rohingyas going back to their own home. So what is the alternative? So one of the alternative, and there will be in fact two broad alternatives proposed today, one in our session and the other one is the session afterwards. Often when we proposed 2017 November in the UNGA, Prime Minister proposed the safe zone. There has been so much of a kind of a less optimism, to put it really mildly, even in the UN parlor, that what is this Bangladesh talking about? And we had to gradually go back and give them a paper. Now, the idea of safe zone may not have a very strong international law basis, but it has been in the practice. In fact, I was going through some of the literature and found out that prior to World War II, there were at least two examples available in Europe. One is in Madrid during the Spanish Civil War. Safe zone was established for the civilians, for non-combatant. And also in Shanghai during the Sino-Japanese War. So it was in the practice. May not have the legal basis, but it was there to save civilians in conflict. or from atrocities. And recently in 1991 for the Kurdish population in northern Iraq. That's our recent memory. Now, what we are sort of proposing here to establish a safe zone in the northern Rakhine, and I'll show you a map afterwards what we are talking about, to save people from conflict and extreme violence. Both the people who are trapped, I call them trapped population, borrowing this word from the climate change literature, and also the people who had been expelled to Bangladesh. Now, what that our prime minister suggested and what she meant by that, there are 5 characteristics of safe zone. I'll quickly go through. It's non-exhaustive, and I'll be very happy to give clarification further. Safe zone is not another IDP camp. Let me be very clear. I have seen, and Sufur has seen, and many of us in IDP camps, it reminds me of Hitler's camp. Exclusively civilian, humanitarian, neutral, and demilitarized in character. No armed element around and in the camp. So it's a very civilian run safe zone that we are talking about. Mandated by an international entity or international community act as a protector, which I'll come back later. And there should be provisions not only on basic services, but also for their life and livelihood and a market. It was a thriving community. Those who have seen Northern Rakhine and Rakhine, this was a self-sustained community, which was not only sustaining them, but also helping the Myanmar economy largely. Now, safe zone cannot be successful, cannot survive without safe corridor linking the safe zones, because this is an area where the Rakhine population and the Rohingya population was living side by side. So there are villages which could be clustered and termed as safe zone and then linked with a corridor, which I had elaborated in one of my paper which came out in journal on the whole thing. So and I'll show you physically today for the first time what we're talking about. Thanks to High Commissioner Sufur for generating a lot of ideas in this. And then that corridor will be used by humanitarian actors or also by the local Rakhines. So it's all purpose. So what is the legal basis? I'll go quickly now. As I said, there's no internationally adopted clear set of principles, but there are notions, practices, and criteria, as I said. Now, there are 2 broad areas where we can look for the principles. One is the Myanmar-Bangladesh arrangement, which Ambassador Sufur has rightly pointed out, especially paragraph 14, where there is a provision that in implementation process of the return, we can other actors, international community, in particular UNHCR and ICRC could come in and help. So that provision is there even in the bilateral arrangements. And the most important thing that was there, we actually fought for it. Another day we'll narrate the history of the negotiation, and Sufur and they were kind of had a sleepless night in those days. Kind of a conducive environment. So how do you create conducive environment where government is not willing, the people of Myanmar is not willing, and how do you do it? So that's where it comes to. Then comes the international legal regime. In fact, there may not be very well developed principles of setting up a safe zone, but there are examples and there are also provisions. 4th Geneva Convention, which has been drafted to protect civilians in armed conflict, is applicable according to Article 3, not only in the international conflict, but internal conflict. So that's one. And it has a very good provision of protecting safe area and people in terms of conflict and violence. And anyway, Myanmar has said that these are not riots or violations of or internal feuds. It's a civil war between them and the ethnic minority groups. So we can also apply the Geneva Convention actually now, and the fight continues now with the Arakan army. Now there's other places where there are explicit and implicit reference to safety and safe zone, which is in the Refugee Convention, especially in the guiding principle of IDPs. And I think we also need to look at 2 more legal regime, which is in the making, which is the responsibility to protect. And I know Australia has been a pioneer and in this area, and sort of pushing the global community to go when Security Council is non-functional or dysfunctional, I don't know which one to use, what we do. Do we let people get killed and abused? In that circumstances, UNGA came out with an idea of responsibility to protect. The history of implementing responsibility to protect and safe zone mixed, but there can be always new good examples be created. And also, I thought human security framework, which was adopted by the UNGA 2012, the background, could also come in very handy in addition to some of the High Commissioner for Human Rights resolutions and the rest of things. Now, who will protect? This also, Fourth Geneva Convention makes provisions for protecting, to sort of identify based on the willingness to give responsibility to protect, which is called protecting powers, quote unquote, and they can bring in their own nationals or nationals from neutral countries to protect civilian. And this has been practiced before and after World War II. ASEAN, China, India, if they want a stable region, and ICRC has to play a big role because they have actually the mandate, the Geneva Convention, so they need to come in. This is a very rough kind of a way of showing that how the safe zone. This is not actually, it has not been done based on the field experience, but just to give you an idea, to start with, in the first phase is Mongdu, Butidong, and Ratidong, and linked with corridor. And I have not put it here. I think through negotiations we can also keep a passage open for these communities, linking it with Cox's Bazar and Bangladesh. And in the second phase, we can then broaden it depending on how it goes. So this is what the idea and the proposals. But there's always a geopolitics. The society cannot live without geopolitics. So this is where Bangladesh and Myanmar interfaces in the midst of big two neighbors, India and China. In fact, there are common borders between India, Bangladesh, and Myanmar, what I call tri-junction, famous tri-junction. And also the huge Bay of Bengal, where we have started feeling the wind of the change in geopolitical gravity coming from Pacific to the Bay of Bengal and the rest of the area. But I think we should never forget that all these also come in very handy for the ICJ and ICC to suggest greater possibilities for protecting Rohingyas, either through safe zone, safe area, and who knows what. Thank you very much. I think I've taken a little more than I should have. Sorry about it.
Thank you, Mr. Shahidul Haq, for your concise but precise and at the same time very comprehensive elaboration of the concept of safe zones and safe corridors. I think you have been able to answer many of the unclear things, but this is an evolving concept. And in our region, I think this is something new, very novel idea. So we'll have to have many more clarifications on that. You have highlighted the civilian and humanitarian character, most important. You have also touched upon direct and indirect legal underpinnings for creating such facilities for the people who have lost all hopes. And these would certainly require much more elaboration for operationalization. Those details will come as we have better clarity or better common understanding of the corridor and the safe zones that we have decided to discuss in greater detail in this session. And it is certainly reasonable that these matters will be clarified in the course of further consultation within the academic world and also in the policy circles. And thereafter, we will form a better understanding of the issues that we'll have to come to grip with. With that, I thank Mr. Shahidul Haq, and I expect that the elements that he has put before us will be touched upon by other discussions here and will benefit from their contribution. Now I call upon Professor Imtiaz Ahmed, an outstanding academic and a long-standing crusader for rights for the Rohingyas. He is also the director of Genocide Studies Center, Dhaka University. He has written extensively on this subject and has also organized many seminars and symposiums on this dear subject of ours. Floor is yours, sir. You have only 5 minutes for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Sophia, honorable dignitaries and friends. Because of lack of time, I'll go straight to the topic. And I've heard keenly what Ambassador Shahidul Haq was saying. I'm familiar with the idea. Now, let me say very bluntly, whatever you do or whatever we do, you need to keep three things on the table. And you need to focus on three things. First, Rohingya identity has to be guaranteed and ensured. It's the problem that we have, or the problem why Myanmar is delaying, is mainly because they don't want to give the recognition of that identity. And it is in their constitution which limits in doing that, and that has to change. Because in the constitution, and this is something, there's an extraordinary book by Thant Minh Yu, the grandson of U Thant, the former Secretary General of United Nations. I think it's a very good book that was published this year, and he makes it very clear that if you have two consecutive cluster villages with more than 50,000 people or 100,000 people, then that group gets autonomy. So by definition, the Rohingyas would get autonomy in the Arakan, and that is what the Myanmar government and the military, they are not going to, still the mindset is not there to deliver that. That's the problem. So you need some changes of the legality and give the Rohingya identity a recognition. Now, there has been some movement on that with ICJ, because at the ICJ, with a provisional verdict, for the first time, you have at the highest international body, the recognition of Rohingya. This did not take place in other forum. Since the ICJ referred to them as Rohingyas, that's, I think, is the starting point. And secondly, those who were present during the deliberation at the ICJ, the Myanmar team, including Aung San Suu Kyi, never for once said that they were illegal migrants or foreigners, anything of that kind. What she said is, she used the word Arakanese Muslims. Well, there are Rohingya Hindus also, but anyway, the term she used is Arakanese Muslim. If it is an Arakanese Muslim, they have to be in Arakan. You can't have a population called Arakanese Muslims and keep them outside Arakan. So the identity, the recognition of the identity is the first thing that we need to focus on and build the pressure on Myanmar. Number two, we need important players to decouple with Myanmar. And I'm referring to India, Japan, and I will include Australia. The Indo-Pacific Alliance must decouple from Myanmar, because this is a contradiction of a serious kind. Here you are almost trying to point out that the Indo-Pacific Alliance is different from One Belt, One Road or China. But when it comes to Myanmar, as we see, particularly India, Japan are together with China when it comes to Myanmar. That has to end. So decoupling of the Indo-Pacific Alliance is critical. The moment the decoupling takes place, I can guarantee you, from my reading of international relations, the moment that takes place, China is going to give tremendous pressure on Myanmar, because the entire focus of the world would be on China, that China, you are protecting a genocidal regime. That's the point. So we need to really focus on India and Japan. And I say this because it is easy to do that because they have a civil society. I can understand it's difficult with China, but then Japan and India have extraordinary civil society. They have extraordinary human rights people, human rights activists. They need to be engaged so that they can put pressure on their governments to decouple. That's critical. And I think Australia has a serious business doing that, in fact, in helping decouple, particularly India and Japan, given the fact that Australia, India, and Japan makes the Indo-Pacific Alliance, of course, along with the US. And finally, there has to be a Rohingya civil political leadership. It is absolutely important. And I will go to the point that the Rohingya diaspora and those who are inside Myanmar must start thinking of creating a global Rohingya council, a civil political council. Because whenever the Rohingya leadership thing comes up, Myanmar would always refer to ARSA. Now, I have no problem, with ARSA or any insurgency which is, justified. And it is in our constitution, actually, that we support the emancipation around the world. But the problem is Myanmar winning the debate or trying to convince the West and all that this is more a terrorism and other things. So I think it is important that the Rohingya leadership be built in a unique manner, because there are Rohingyas around the world in more than 19 countries. And I see no reason, given the technology that we have, it is absolutely important that they establish a global Rohingya council, a civil political pressure group, so that Myanmar would understand what they are dealing with. Unless and until that is there, because yes, Bangladesh would take an issue. Bangladesh, and other countries, as I said, Malaysia, India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, there are Rohingyas all around. It's not only in Bangladesh that the Rohingyas are there. Well, we have the maximum number, but there are Rohingyas around the world, even in Australia. So my last point, and I will end by saying that it is important that the Rohingya civil political leadership be built in order to pressurize Myanmar. If we do these three things, I'm sure Myanmar is going to blink, and we are going to get what the Rohingyas require, the citizenship, the identity that has not been given for them for centuries or for decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Imtiaz, for your very illuminating observations on various aspects, particularly the geopolitical considerations and the role of the Rohingya diaspora and the leadership that is expected from them, but with a degree of unity that would make things easier for the friends of Rohingya to push your case. And in fact, there are various elements, some constitutional, some administrative. Those are the issues of details. We would, if time permits, we'll get into some of them in the question answer session. With that, let me invite Professor Nicole Georgiou from Sydney to take part in the conversation. Professor Nicole.
Thank you, Your Excellency Raman, and good evening or good morning, good afternoon, honourable dignitaries and friends. Before I respond to His Excellency Haque's presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the country of the Wadi Wadi people of the Dharawal Nation, and acknowledge their ancestors who have been traditional owners of their country for thousands of years. I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people. And I acknowledge my gratitude that we share this land today, our sorrow for the costs of that sharing, and our hope and belief that we can move to a place of equity, justice and partnership together. I also sincerely hope and believe that with greater international commitment, we can move to a place of equity, justice and partnership for the Rohingya people. I'd like to respond to His Excellency Haque's suggestion for a strategy of establishing safe zones in the Rakhine State under the doctrine of responsibility to protect. Bangladesh has taken the initiative to solve an intractable problem, but like all interventions, it's going to depend on political will. The UN Secretary General's 2009 Three Pillars document tries to explain how R2P articulates with state sovereignty. Essentially, R2P is trying to answer the question of how to protect human rights when states are unwilling or unable to do so. It's not really about trying to set limits on state sovereignty, but it's about trying to have human rights protection become part of state sovereignty. The challenge then for addressing the issue of repatriation through the framework of R2P is that the concept of R2P hinges on notions of sovereignty as responsibility, whereby responsibility is now seen as a base element of sovereignty. To put it another way, the state carries the responsibility to protect people within its borders, whether it recognises them as citizens or not. However, while there is broad international support for the concept of R2P, the difficulties have always been around the issues of intervention and the selective application of the doctrine. For example, it has been used to justify intervention in Libya, but has not been used to intervene in either Syria or in Myanmar, even though in many ways the evidence of gross human rights abuses has been even clearer. Of course, regional organisations such as ASEAN can take action under Chapter 8 of the UN Charter, provided that what they do is broadly in support of UN aims, that is, global security, human rights protection, and so on. We see regional organisations involved in peace operations around the world, which are not exclusively of the UN, for example, the African Union. So there is indeed, as discussed earlier, scope for an ASEAN operation in Myanmar. All that it would take is the political will to create it. And for me, that is where the problem lies. Historically, ASEAN is not known for its strong position on protecting human rights. Rather, it has been a very strong defender of non-intervention. Arguably, in the Southeast Asian region, the principle of non-intervention is very strong. And these points raise the key question of, have the principles of R2P been localised enough to be accepted by policymakers in Southeast East Asia? Indeed, have they been accepted enough by policymakers internationally? Under R2P, the second pillar suggests working with the state to develop the capacity for human rights protection. This is a consensual approach and often used in many peace operations, but interestingly, not usually referred to as R2P. Again, the question is going to be how serious is Myanmar about working in good faith to resettle people and to prevent the persecution of the Rohingya, a people it has denied citizenship as part of its national identity formation. Like all interventions, it is a great deal easier with the consent of the state than without that consent. So if Myanmar is on board to having a solution, and it appears that it is not, then the will of important regional actors such as China, along with that of ASEAN states, will be crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nicole Georgiou. I think you have touched upon important aspects like the interface between sovereignty and responsibility that we do not see at play in case of Myanmar. They have abandoned all international responsibility and in their conduct in the recent years and even in the past decades. You have also talked about the ASEAN's so-called preference for non-intervention and how that has had impact within the region and beyond, and particularly in this case, it has become a bottleneck. It has created a hindrance for making things easier for resolving issues. So these are the questions that will agitate our mind for long time to come, and we'll have to find answers to them. Thank you, Professor Nicole. With that, let me introduce to you Dr. Wakaruddin, Director General of the Arakan Rohingya Union. He has, to his credit, long years of struggle for fights of his community, for the rights of his community. He is a well-known Rohingya face in the international community. He joins us from the USA. I invite you to make your remarks and offer your views. You have 5 minutes too.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency, Ambassador Saifur Rahman, and thank you, the organizers. Good morning from US. Your Excellencies, dignitaries, and distinguished panelists and the viewers. First and foremost, I wish to express our deepest gratitude to Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and people and government of Bangladesh for allowing such a huge influx of Rohingya refugees and averting a major humanitarian disaster. Okay, now for creating conditions for sustainable return and security, the condition is not there in our country. Everybody knows condition is not there. The condition must be created by who? The responsibility solely lies on Myanmar because it is an issue of Myanmar between its ethnic minority Rohingya and the government of Myanmar. So Myanmar has to resolve this issue and take the responsibility. Of course, the international community such as UNHCR, UNDP, and others are there to assist, to help. But Myanmar has to have the political willpower to lay the groundwork and then facilitate, involve heavily and facilitate the process of repatriation. There are but before doing that, we have to think about the obstacles. There are a number of obstacles that have to be overcome before a sustainable solution can be found. I will go point by point here, given limited time. First, biggest problem right now we are facing in repatriation is the delay tactics. Myanmar government is very good in delay tactics. They thrive on that. Everything they do, they will delay. Myanmar has signed the agreement, the repatriation agreement with Bangladesh in 2017. It clearly said safe, dignified, and voluntary return to their original homes. I underscore original homes. So are there conditions on the ground? No, that's not conducive for return to their original homes. Nothing has changed on the ground. In fact, situation has gone from bad to worse in certain areas, let alone the repatriation from Bangladesh. Myanmar government is stopping the internally displaced people, those people who did not cross to Bangladesh and remain in Arakan, taking shelter in nearby villages. They are threatening them, they cannot return to their original homes. Number two, coronavirus, another challenge we are facing. The new thing, Myanmar government said as a pretext that because of coronavirus, they cannot do it. The ministry has said that, and they said, reportedly said that it can be resumed after coronavirus. What, 5 years, 10 years? What do we know about coronavirus? In situ, yes, there are, can you say there are some coronavirus situation, but let's not forget, there's also flu season in Arakan. And many doctors has identified a major flu outbreaks. Nonetheless, repatriation has to be done now. The testing can be done, medical professionals. And fortunately, we have in Bangladesh and 1.2 million refugees, very little coronavirus, still over 100 reported cases. And then repatriation process, we think that Rohingya leadership from the camp, educated people are there, should be included in the process of repatriation negotiations. Number three, Arakan army. The fighting in Arakan is taking a serious toll on civilian population. Instability is increasing ever. the Myanmar government, instead of bringing peace to Rakhine State so the repatriation can be done peacefully, it is fueling the fire on the ground, fighting the war with Arakan army. Let's get to bottom of this whole thing, the root cause. Root cause is the genocide, and in the instrument is 1982 citizenship law. It's crafted cleverly by military. I call it blueprint to expel, to eliminate the Rohingya from their own land, home country. That citizenship law has provided the fertile ground for the crisis that entails human rights violations, violence, killing, rape, and so on and so forth. Without addressing the root cause, any surgical removal of the issue will only add to the agony of Rohingya people. That's very, very serious issue. Now comes NVC. I will not go into detail of NVC. I'm simply saying that they are forcing Rohingya to do NVC and forcing them to write Bengali. And you know why. The term Rohingya, ethnic identity Rohingya, has become a toxic for Myanmar. NVC is the foundation of a system of slavery, framework of slavery. That's what they're planning. They're simply saying that, okay, you can live here, but you have to live like a slave. Why NVC for the indigenous population of Arakan? Okay, the question comes now. Will there be a solution? Can there be a solution? Yes, we Rohingya people strongly believe that there will be a solution. There can be a solution, but it has to come from within Myanmar. It is Myanmar's problem. It's Myanmar has created this. Myanmar has to have the political willpower to solve the issue. And lastly, let's not forget that our 2P safe zone. Thank you. The safe zone has to be established. It must be done through international cooperation. Thank you, Your Excellency, Secretary Shahidul Haq and the Professor Georgiou for providing the details of the safe zone. Many people in the international community does not know. They ask, what is safe zone? It is territorial integrity violation? No, it's not. Secretary, Professor Georgiou and Secretary Excellency Shahidul has laid out clearly what that really thing is. It is very enlightening. I think international community need to pay attention to that. So finally, there must be a well-coordinated international pressure through all avenues, including UN mechanisms, ICJ ruling, ICC investigation, and all other channels. I mean, unrelenting pressure on Myanmar. And the same thing. That's the key. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wakaruddin, for raising very practical issues that will be required and also trying to address some of the misunderstandings surrounding this concept of safe zones and safe corridors. Let me now invite Mr. Ne San Luin. He's joining from Germany. He's from Free Rohingya Coalition. His organization has been working hard to generate sufficient attention of the international community and business on the atrocities committed by Myanmar. They are campaigning to boycott Myanmar's products to mount additional pressure on Myanmar. Mr. Luin, please share your observations. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers for organizing this important event. As the return of Rohingya survivor from Bangladeshi camp is anxiety, this kind of event is necessary for awareness, action, and to heap pressure on Myanmar to change its genocidal policy toward Rohingya. 3 years ago, we witnessed a mass exodus of Rohingya. It was not the first wave, it was the third wave since 1978. The violence against Rohingya, followed by exodus, has been repeated again and again because of a lack of action against the perpetrator. This panel discussion is about safety and security for the return of the Rohingya. So let us remember that Rohingya have experienced several rounds of killing, slaughter, rape, and arson attack by the Myanmar military and government. We took refuge in Bangladesh and went back to our homeland in Arakan state, but we were driven out again and again as our return were not granted with safety and security. And of course, we were never given any right. So clearly the protection for Rohingya must be granted so as not to repeat the violence and exodus, and part and parcel of this is the restoration of our right. However, all of you know that Myanmar is not going to create a condition that will ensure citizenship, ethnic right, and protection of Rohingya. The security forces stationed in Arakan are supposed to protect all inhabitants, but instead they engage in various types of persecution against Rohingya and others. All the administration department directly controlled by the Aung San Suu Kyi-led government have not changed their discriminatory policy against Rohingya. The suffering of Rohingya inside Myanmar continues. About 150,000 have been confined to IDP camps since 2012, and the remaining about 450,000 are effectively in what can only be described as an open-air prison. Despite all this, Myanmar has been falsely claiming that they have implemented most of the recommendation of the Anand Commission. We are not seeing any changes whatsoever. Myanmar has recently challenged the wall by erasing Rohingya villages in an astonishing revision of the map of Myanmar. Sadly, we are witnessing the silence of the wall. The UN has not made any objection, but is meekly accepting the changes made by Myanmar. My fellow Rohingya in Bangladeshi camp who have survived the brutal killing of Myanmar security force want justice before their return. We know international justice mechanisms are underway and are going to take some years to conclude. Any country which has signed the Genocide Convention can and should pursue justice for us. We would like to urge all signatories of the convention to join the Gambia. Canada and Netherlands have jointly declared that they will support the Gambia and focus on sexual violence. This is of significance, and I hope they will follow through. Rape was not just another act. It was a specific strategy of Myanmar's genocidal policy. We know that the action of the international community can change our fate. The world leader often express concern for our situation, but the problem is they take little or no action. As a Rohingya, I want to make this demand for the safety and security for the return. Our homeland in Arakan State or Rakhine State in Myanmar has to be demilitarized. All our rights, including citizenship and ethnic right, have to be restored. We should not be moved anywhere without full consultation and consent and undergirded by international law. The international community, including US, UK, and EU, should arrange for the protection of returnee until Myanmar criminals are brought to justice and Myanmar abandon their genocidal policy against us. We have been suffering from crime of genocide committed by Myanmar for the past 40 years. We could never sleep soundly. We will never have peace if we are surrounded by Myanmar killers. Remove them from our homeland. We know you have the power to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nathan Wayne. You have brought up important issues, the responsibility of the countries and how that could be brought in this game so that Myanmar understands and listens to international demand and conscience. Particularly your task of creating more pressure through advocacy in the business arena is something that is very important and that should continue with much greater intensity because the government always try to play safe. Thank you, Mr. Lwin. I would now invite Ms. Yasminullah. I think she's joining from USA. If she can be given the floor, the administrators, please. Yes, Ms. Yasminullah.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. To be honest, I'm a little bit unprepared to be speaking on the security part, but I think that it is really, really important to raise this issue since it wasn't raised before, that this important discussion that we're having about security, about safety, about compensation, about every single other issues of returning or having safe zones are actually being had at this moment, and several, within other several platforms, without the actual victims. And it is actually not a disregard or any disrespect to the organizers who've worked really, really hard on this. This discussion needs to be had with the people who are directly affected by the decisions that are going to be made. Perhaps the argument is brewing that it is a responsibility of the members of the Rohingya and the diaspora to be the link and relaying the information, because Rohingya people are not, a lot of times we're seen as not quite capable of grasping the complexity of the situation or the laws applied. But that's just the game of telephone. If we continuously put the burden on the diaspora in order for them to relay proper information, accurate information about the complexity of the UN agencies or the bureaucracy that is involved, it doesn't really encourage an organic discussions between the affected population and the actors within the international community. I would even go further to say that as much as it is a duty held up by several signed covenants made by the international community to prevent genocide and protect the affected communities, it is as important that the international community holds itself responsible in ensuring that the Rohingya refugees understand their place and their rights within the international laws applied, not to leave them to their own device in navigating the complexity, the bureaucratic systems that takes years for many of those in this discussion to study and gain expertise in. I repeat, as I have before, that this is not our fault that we continue to live through genocide, but rather blatant missteps of those who are tasked in upholding these laws, in preventing such mass number of people from being inflicted in the first place. I truly hope that as we have these conversations, we do not forget the integrity of the international legal mechanisms. It is simply not enough for the international community to pat itself on the back with these cases going on at the ICJ, universal jurisdiction, various different other means. Continuous meaningful engagements with the community need to be ensued. And that includes making sure that the community understands how any of these processes will affect their lives now and in the long term. The process have to mean something for the Rohingya. They have to offer us something. Because if these processes are only a way for various nation states to do more of virtue signaling, or for several international lawyers to gain prominence, or for different actors in the realm of human rights advocacy to have a fulfilling careers, then this is nothing but a failure of our collective humanity. If Rohingya will not gain anything from participating and pouring our hearts and souls into each time that we relive the trauma through interviews, through research, then none of this mean anything at all. If justice mechanism does not offer justice, some sort of reparations or compensation for the harm that we've been put through, then what purpose does it serve? I know that there is a lot of struggle, and a lot of us actually fight through the system, try to wrestle against the system that might not work properly. But are there ways for us to improve the system, to work accordingly? We have had so many genocide. How many more does it take for the system to actually work properly? Please remember that it was the international community that turned the blind eyes over our plight, not us. When the UN head in Myanmar actually suppressed the reports in the Rakhine state, She suppressed the report right before the acts of genocide was seen so violently, so blatantly, and laid out in front of the international community in 2017.
Ms. Yasminullah, I think we should go first and try to end
Can I just end with this? Can I just end with this, please? I would just want to encourage the international community to actually look deeper within itself and really choose what it actually wants to do for the Rohingya. And I will end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Yasminullah. We have many questions that has come, and before we take some of them, because of paucity of time, we will not be able to address all of them. I would like to recognize Mr. Ulamin. I think he is from Sydney. He's, if the administrator can bring him in. Mr. Ulamin will have only 2 minutes to give his short, brief remarks. Mr. Ulamin. The administrator may please bring him in.
Mr. Mint, you can hear us? Yeah, he's in. Hi there.
Yeah, Mr. Ulamint, good evening. We are running short of time. So if you can make your remarks in 2 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you very much for this outstanding conference. We highly, on behalf of the Rohingya community, I highly appreciate the Australian government as well as my good friends, High Commissioner of Bangladesh to Australia and Mr. Radak, and our Deputy Minister for Home Affairs. As we say, the Rohingyas, the situation of the Rohingyas is not an internal affairs. It is a role for international community to take an active, decisive actions. And you know, Bangladesh is not the only country who is sharing the burden of the influx of the Rohingya refugees. And along with Bangladesh, the other regional countries, their situation and their securities are also at stake. If this situation persists to exist, the status quo is not favorable. I strongly agree with the points that have been made by the former secretary, my good friend Saidul Haq, that it has to there has to be a humanitarian intervention, and along with the intervention, the rights of the Rohingya has to be respected, particularly the rights of citizenship, the reparations, and the other issue as well. Thank you very much. That's all what I want to address.
Thank you, Mr. Ulamint. With that, let me once again thank all the speakers and presenter for their valuable contribution. These your thoughts have aroused questions in the minds of our followers and listeners. We have a flurry of questions, and among them, some are generic in nature, while a few are specific to the subject we are discussing this evening on safe zones and safe corridor. So among them, there are a few questions. I have forwarded one question from Mr. Ataus Samad to all the participants. And here I would like to hear from Mr. Shahidullah and Professor Imtiaz in particular on what is preventing the international community in deploying UN peacekeeping forces in Myanmar for ensuring repatriation of more than 1 million Rohingyas. Then another part of the question was, can the genocide of the Rohingya be considered as failure and inaction of the international community? There are other parts also. So these are the two questions that we may take immediately. I would call upon Mr. Shahidul Haq and Professor Imtiaz to respond to these two questions first.
Can I ask Professor Imtiaz to go ahead while I collect my thoughts?
Come on. Okay. Thank you very much. No, well, the why no UN peacekeeping, that answer is quite simple, because of the Security Council. unless we have unanimity there, it's not going to happen. And that's precisely the reason. That's precisely the reason I'm saying that Myanmar is doing what it is doing mainly because it has, and I've said also in public several times, they have 3 countries in their pocket, literally in their pocket, and that is China, India, and Japan. And what a contradiction! What a contradiction that you have India and China together, particularly after Galwan Valley, particularly after the Fifth War. It's absolutely a major contradiction. I don't know how the Indian human rights organizations, the media, how they can, they can tolerate this contradiction. So I guess our work, the international community, including Australia, need to impress upon India, need to impress upon Japan. Now, when that happens, and as I say, you can actually focus entire direction on China, that look, you are the one who is actually helping a genocidal regime. And I'm telling you, after the Wuhan and after this COVID-19, China is not in a mood to tolerate that somebody is finger pointing that you are saving a genocidal country. It can do what it can do mainly because you have the Indo-Pacific Alliance with Myanmar. We need to decouple that.
Thank you. Mr. Shahidul Haq, please.
Thank you very much. I agree with Professor Imtiaz. Let me just dig down a little more. I think, Security Council's failure is obvious, but I think that we need to also keep in context the geopolitics with the Professor Imtiaz has alluded to us in the Indo-Pacific politics. I think one more aspect is that whether the Rohingyas, I had to say this, are important community in that region, important in the eyes of big powers. Can they be washed away? They can be left die. That's the question. And I think some of the big powers think that suppose if the Rohingyas are no longer staying there like Palestinians, what's the big deal? It is not going to hurt my national interest. So why should I unnecessarily go and antagonize the Myanmar government? On the issue of Security Council, Security Council has become dysfunctional. Let me be very frank. We just had yesterday and day before yesterday a discussion at the North-South University. That what organ within the UN is not being able to serve the people is the Security Council. The rest of the UN possibly is doing little more in terms of helping the people, but Security Council had utterly failed. And that is why we have these all kinds of responsibility to protect human security and safe zone idea coming out and, sort of taking a Security Council behind. So Security Council, I don't foresee in its present mandate and structure would be able to deal with this. And Rohingya communities are not that important to the Security Council. I'm very sorry, but I have participated in Security Council deliberations, and that's the feel I get. And they often feel that why Bangladesh is taking it so seriously. It doesn't actually hurt them. It may hurt the humanity. What's the big deal? So that's very clear. On the issue of genocide, absolutely. In fact, this is another area where the whole international community has terribly failed. The whole idea of never again has continuously happened, whether it is in Syria, in other places, and in Myanmar, the northern Rakhine and Rakhine. Even after very clear verdict coming out of the ICJ, some of the countries seems to be not hearing it. And I can't reveal, but I've said in this after the verdict, and they just don't listen. So what do you do when you have these kinds of multilateralism? I agree with Yasmin that the international community cannot shrug away their responsibility. I think time has come when the Rohingya community should also organize and stand up, as Professor Imtiaz has alluded to us. they have to make enough noise for the world to take cognizance of their suffering. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shahidul Haq. While agreeing with you on the dysfunctionality at the UN Security Council level, let me also say that the UN family as a whole has also failed in case of Myanmar. I am privy to many aspects of the dysfunctionality. There are three silos of incoherent organizations in Myanmar that have always tried to please the Myanmaris and mainly led by the developmental pillar. In that context, the peace pillar and as well as the humanitarian pillars were actually not having the voice that they should have articulated. So all are in a competition to please the Myanmaris, and there are many examples of that. So that dysfunctionality at the Myanmar country level also played an important role in these failings that we are all talking about. So we are running.
Ambassador, since you bring it out, I think we should also flag it here. We have a Rosenthal report now, where it's very clear that the thing that you are mentioning, the whole UN system, I think need to be blamed for the genocide which is being committed. Had it been the Second World War situation, things would have been possibly different. Now, some of the people who could have done much to avoid this genocide, they haven't done their role. And you know, and I know, there are documentary evidence on that. But these people are still running the show in UN. So that is something also the Rohingya community need to raise their voice, so that next time another UN official, for whatever reason, whatever logic, if I cannot do anything, I should resign and go home, saying that, you know, I cannot stop genocide. I don't want to be party, so I go home. That has not happened. So that has to be.
The time has come for us to think in that line also, because in the negotiation that we had bilaterally, after 8 months of negotiation of all Hallabulla, the UN MOU has been a much diluted document than what we have bilaterally secured for the Rohingya and for Bangladesh. So we will not spend much time on that. I have one question that I thought I should be answering. It goes into the heart of the topic that we're discussing. Dr. Kamaluddin has raised a question. The idea of creating a safe zone may consider creating a state within a state. A state within a state. And do you think Myanmar will accept this idea? Well, I will expect Mr. Shahidul Haq to also come in along with Professor Georgiou on this issue. Let me simply say that in this conception of the whole thing, the territorial integrity of Myanmar will never be questioned. The idea here is to create zones where laws of Myanmar will run, but the humanitarian laws and other requisite safeguards for the Rohingya community will be maintained. And we also know that in the last 6 to 7 decades, the Rohingya community has always tried to be part of Myanmar. They've never indicated any desire to come out of Myanmar. So in this effort towards inclusion, this conception of state doesn't take place. What Rohingyas want, they want to be integrated fully in the state of Myanmar as equal citizens. So here the question of a state within a state doesn't arise. So with that, may I ask the two presenters to also add their remarks on this?
No, thank you very much for raising a fundamental questions. We are not trying to change the geography of Myanmar. Under the present system, it's almost impossible unless you are in Iraq, Syria, Libya, or Somalia. So, keeping a thought that maps keep on changing if people wants it to be. I think the UN system, in the name of sovereignty and non-intervention, has kept their job very nicely. When the 3 forerunners of UN designed charter, it said, "We the people." So where is the "we the people"? They end up serving the state. Fine, we have no problem with it. But shouldn't it also balance serving the people when the people are under huge violations for which UN was created? And that's why some people believe that UN is gradually become irrelevant to the vulnerables, to the abused and the rest. So, excuse me, I think you have your answer. And let me also tell you, there is a group of academicians, civil society, who thinks, you know, the whole idea of creating safe zone to protect people is not a good idea. Fine, you go ahead and argue. But then how you propose to save people from a genocidal government? It didn't happen only in 2017. It will happen again. It will happen on your corridor, on your doorstep. What then you'll do? That's my question to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have another interesting session awaiting us. So I would, despite having many more questions, I would, as a moderator, will have to cut it short. I would like to thank all the participants for their insightful contributions, and the participants as a whole for the patience and following this wonderful discussion. I think we will have to have many more dialogues on this to understand the intricacies of the various aspects, legal, administrative, and other aspects of creating safe zones, and how that safe zone will be both for the IDPs and people in open camps inside Myanmar. That is a big chunk. And the second one is the safe zones and corridors for the returnees. So ultimately, both of these will have to be answered as we try to find clarity on this important conceptual question that we have before us. With that, let me thank all of you. And
can we not listen to Nicole? We haven't heard from Nicole her response. Sorry, Ambassador.
Oh yeah. Professor Nicole, if you are still there.
Oh, thank you. I understand that time is short, so I won't speak for long. I am one of those parties who does see safe zones as fraught. International experience has shown that safe zones and safe areas rarely remain safe, and I'm really thinking of Srebrenica in 1995, when I call that example. And it essentially can paint a target on the back of the population you're trying to protect. These sorts of areas often pose significant dangers to civilian populations, and if there are not adequate safeguards in place, they promise an illusion of safety rather than safety itself. And they can come under deliberate attack, as we've seen before in the example that I gave. So I'll leave it there because I know we're short of time, and I agree that there's a lot more that can be said on that. So I'll move over and let the next panel continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think these your points are valid, and there are questions on the role of the protecting powers. If there is an better understanding on the role and commitment of the protecting powers, things would be perhaps easier. But we hear a lot from the region, particularly from ASEAN countries and the countries in the neighborhood, that they have solidarity with these people. So we would expect that in the interest of solidarity, in the interest of saving people, they should come forward in protecting this persecuted community and try to help us to come out of the labyrinth that we are in. I thank you for your contribution, and I would now pass on the responsibility to the next moderator, Christian Job, for conducting in the second session on compensation. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that interesting discussion. So I'm meant to set the scene for the next paper. I'm going to be very, very brief though, just to say that the research I spoke of before created the numbers that we could use to extrapolate the population of then 800,000 in the camps. It's since increased, of course, but with help from various parties, we tried to put costs and values on what is really not able to be valued. We understand that trying to value trauma, grief, loss, injury is sounding material in a situation where we should be considering humanity. But we tried to create measures that could be used to pressure Myanmar. We think that it is Myanmar that should pay, and that this could be used by the courts as a threat if Myanmar doesn't cooperate. So with those few words, I'm going to pass to Machine Habib to present the paper, and then we'll have a discussion after that. Thank you, Machine.
Thank you, Christine, and thanks, distinguished speakers and panel members, as well as audience. I'm really pleased that this evening, Saturday evening and morning, on the other side of the world, everyone, more than 100 people are joining us for this important event. So we're going to talk about this paper that we mentioned as a key note speak for this session. So I'm not going to repeat what our distinguished speakers have talked about, setting the context in security dimensions and human rights issue. We go straight on to the compensation issues in that aspect, and we can continue discussing about a few other related issues. So let's look at, how we see Myanmar style, land clearing. We see this is Google, map. It shows in January 2017, it's the Green Lash village, and this land was empty. All of a sudden, after 16 September, we see burned down villages and something was building on that side, you can see. Later on the year, the 7th of December, picture shows that's been bulldozed, land clearing took place, and farther down the line, 26th April 2018, we saw some sort of a development is happening. And that particular small development, we can see construction of a pagoda or some kind, it is taking a full-fledged. So the context is, this is happening, we know, and has been talked a lot. So what we see, what we have done, we have seen international community has come forward with various ways. They have raised 70% of the 100% of targeted appeal of $727 million to support. However, there has been some question about accountability of international NGOs and their role in the camp, and then the many times I spent in the camp, among the Rohingyas, among the host communities, among government of Bangladesh, there has been some sort of a tension there as well. So one thing I can obviously understand from the scale of the magnitude of the crisis that I have seen on my right before my eyes many times, that no amount of money can bring ensure a quality of life of 1.1 million people living in a land size a little smaller than Melbourne Airport. So that's the bottom line. We can also see in terms of repatriation, everybody knows what is happening. The Burmese nationalism fueled racism is in the bottom of the things. It's sort of fundamental to bring any kind of dialogue into inclusive society. So, and then the coercive military regime supporting that racism is actually fueling this sort of hostile environment against Rohingyas. I'm quoting again Ambassador Shahidul Haq, from his previous, talk in NSU. We have seen, three agreement has been signed. So far, no one has returned. So far, no one has returned. And interesting, that shows the prospect is very bleak. That, from a layman's point of view, I'm not an expert in this area, and many of you here that will be thinking, how on earth are we going to bring back 1.1 million people, and when that's going to happen? So, however, we strongly believe, and I think every one of us will strongly believe, Myanmar must be held responsible, morally, ethically, in many other ways, to compensate the repatriation of Rohingya refugees. So the study that we're going to present, we looked at two important issues. We looked at estimating the economic loss, where we looked at assets, housing conditions, and those material in natural quantifiable market data we could get from Myanmar and adjacent countries in the region. We also looked at estimate of trauma from around the region in Southeast Asia and Myanmar and Bangladesh, India, and adjacent countries, of how much trauma payment usually a victim receives in such conditions. So we see it poses a potential solution. We strongly believe a solution to pressure Myanmar to compensate Rohingya people for the loss, and we would like to further explore, and estimate what we did. We estimated as closely as possible how much is a fair compensation for the loss, and who might be paying, why they might be paying, and that's the question. So I'll just brush through the research, method. We looked at a population of 800,000. That's the population we extrapolated the number to from, a 3,300 interviews or 16,000 individuals, data, and the findings are here. So we look at in 2018 study, we found out 80%, almost 80% Rohingyas wanted to go back ASAP, as soon as possible. That's their preferred place. So if there's a solid arrangement and security arrangement and support, they would go back. That's what they told me end of 2017 or January 2018. And we look at this, we ask few questions, and this is the fourth most important issues they were talking about. They wanted some sort of a compensation, because if you look at the four, the top four, factors, these are accountability and justice. These are essentially, these factors are, ensuring one or other accountability of Myanmar, what they did, and serving justice to Myanmar people. They have lost, lives and many other atrocities they experienced. So we can look at compensation, 95% overwhelmingly said, yes, we want some sort of a compensation of what we lost. And we try to quantify what they have lost to that level. So look at this on the first table. So the table 11, what it shows on the paper that I have distributed to the speakers, and it will be is available for the general public, whoever requests us, and it will be published soon. So this, we can see, the land size on an average, average Rohingyas, they used to own 2 acres of land. And from there, we looked at the land reclamation cost. So if you want to grow back whatever you wanted to grow and cultivate and so forth, the minimum cost is 2,500 US dollar, and that number comes to about 700 million US dollar. We looked at fish pond, how many fish pond they had, and from there we looked at estimated cost of 27 million. So the total land, particularly land reclamation of land and household, I would say community owned ponds, horticultures and other facilities in the a homestay garden, it particularly would cost, about 795 million US dollar. We look at the next table as loss of savings. This is where we saw, we asked them how much they used to earn. So on an average, the Rohingya household we looked at, they used to earn $233 per month. So you can imagine that is very much realistic in the context of Rakhine, in the how many dollars it comes a day. And you look at that the loss due to the left. So this is about average, on average, Rohingya people, they left 773 US dollar somewhere at home, or they left that cash money in Myanmar. And then we also asked them how much it cost them to come to and travel to Bangladesh during the crisis. So that only account for 1.4 billion US dollar. So that's that, and yet we did not actually calculate the cost of return whenever they're gonna be able to return back home. We did not calculate that estimation of returning back to Myanmar. The next table shows their housing. So we have seen pictures after pictures, satellite pictures, and everywhere, it shows different types of house, and the whole village is burned down, demolished, and so forth. So we looked at various kinds of housing, and we got data from inside Myanmar. We got data from adjacent countries in the region, how much it will cost to rebuild a house. It's a minimum cost we are looking at. And if you're looking at contracting out multinational companies, UN agencies, UNHCR or UN Habitat to build houses, probably that would cost 3 times that our estimation of 785 million around. The next table, we look at sun-dry assets. So this is about what they used to own. If we look at simple bed, chair, table, toilet setup, from owning a bicycle to boat, television, mobile phone. So household, every item, mostly we were able to ask them, and they were able to recollect how much it may cost. So we validated data from Myanmar and come up with some sort of an average amount it may cost to buy back in that. But however, I have to mention that these prices are not inflation adjusted. So this sun-dry asset comes to 221 million in total. The next one we see in the cost of trauma, and that's what probably the world has seen so much, from there. So when we extrapolated the number of death in 800,000 people, what we found, about 29,491 people got killed. And we have evidence of, how many women's been raped, about 21,000. And this number, the valuation for trauma compensation, it's below the industry, standard, in the region. So we looked at, in Bangladesh, we looked at Myanmar, we looked at Bangkok, Laos, and just region. So this is the bare minimum, cost of, losing life, permanent disability, gunshot wound, beating injury, burns, and rape victim. So that comes to, about 2.1 billion US dollar. And there it comes, we summarize the total compensation amount. What we see from land, savings, housing, valuation of assets. We looked at the sun-dry asset, cost of trauma, the total compensation. In an estimate, it could be something around 5.3, 5.4 billion US dollar. That could certainly fairly compensate, we believe fairly compensate the Rohingyas for their loss and psychological and assets and that sort of loss. We look at another dimension. We did not include this in our calculation at all because this is the cost of humanitarian aid. We looked at cost of each month of feeding 1.2 million people in Bangladesh. And then we come up with a figure that estimates to 1.5 billion. And in terms of Bangladesh government's effort, this is the absolute minimum assumption. If you look at infrastructure, and other, support from various ministries that have come forward, it has come to 1 billion estimation. Environmental damage that caused by the refugees, we looked at international standard of $25,000 per hectare for replenishing a particular piece of land of a hectare. And that comes to 57 million. It's an absolute minimum to 2.64 billion US dollar. But we are not claiming this, because this is, we are not saying Myanmar should pay Bangladesh government or to international community for this, cost of humanitarian aid and the environmental damage. What we particularly appealing that if Myanmar pays that 5.4 billion to, the loss of life and others for the Rohingya people, that will justify the sufferings it caused the Myanmar people. So in conclusion, I would just like to say, appealing, Myanmar government in many ways, it's not, we are not seeing any kind of movement. It's not, we do not see any movement happening in a positive manner. We would like to bring them accountable, and the way we can, the more we can make them accountable, the more they will be under pressure by international communities, and so they may move forward to, come up with a durable solution. So you look at the prospect of Rohingya refugees currently sheltering in Bangladesh can return to Rakhine and live healthy, peaceful life is very much unrealistic. Even if you open the door tomorrow, where they're gonna go and how much money they would have to restart their life. So prospect of, and again, the prospect of going back to IDP camps in Myanmar that everyone raises, it's still there. So no other country so far has accepted or expressed their willingness to house, 100,000 Rohingyas. So we have already seen, quite recently, 300 Rohingyas were forced to, move to, Bhasanchar, whereas every other country's developed nations were saying, yeah, Bangladesh should be accepting them. But, no one has accepted 300 refugees. They were stranded in the water. So look at, given the circumstances, the state, Myanmar state should make reparation for those who fled. An amount of 5.4 billion that we assume that's a fair compensation. We see, given the huge aid funded fund raised by international community, it will be unreasonable to expect international community to pay any sort of compensation. So we have also seen, in 2017, Penny argues that Myanmar's, civil society and its capacity to publicly imagine a free, equal, and peaceful future will remain stifled until it acknowledges the genocide they occurred. And there's ample evidence of genocide. Not only that, if you go on, look at Penny's publication, in 2017, she clearly pointed out, 1988, the State Peace and Development Council come up with, 10 commitments so that to exterminate Rohingyas, which has been in their plan. It is a planned effort to exterminate and kill Rohingyas for a long term. So what we could do, where Myanmar could pay, how could Myanmar pay that money? I think we understand, international pressure, trade sanction or some sort of an ICC action, and particularly ASEAN. The ASEAN has been keeping their hands off, saying anything directly, but that's where I believe need to be taking a lot more actions. So we see some of the limitations are still there in terms of what we saw. There are appropriate value. There's some may what really looked at the trauma and loss. So that's some of these limitations. And I'm open for any questions and further discussion. Thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you very much, Mushin. And I should acknowledge that our research was funded by a consortium of parties We haven't thanked them yet. They'll get the chance to speak, we hope, at the end if we don't go on till midnight. Particularly the Institution of Diploma Engineers Bangladesh, ASA Philippines Foundation, Ambassador Sufi Rahman, and Ambassador Shahidul Haq when he was Foreign Secretary. They helped pay for our research, but it was done very much on a shoestring. I should mention that since then, in January, February 2018, Dr. Habib went back to Bangladesh at the start of this year and collected data on over 3,000 camp residents again, plus he went to the host community and got a similar number, 3,400 surveys from that population as well. So now in terms of discussants, if you're still with us, I'd really like to call on the Honourable Philip Ruddock, AO, former Attorney General of Australia. Mr. Ruddock is the second longest serving parliamentarian in the Australian Parliament. He was first elected in '73 and retired in 2016. And during that period, he served many roles, but particularly as the Minister for Immigration and Multicultural Affairs, the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, and also Attorney General. And since leaving Parliament, Mr. Ruddock has kept up his active service, working as Australia's Envoy for Human Rights, the chair of the expert panel on the Religious Freedom Review, and he's been a passionate advocate for the resolution of the plight of displaced Rohingya everywhere, and he was made an Officer of the Order of Australia, AO, in the 2020 Queen's Birthday Honours list. So, Mr. Ruddock, we really welcome your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. It's very generous in your introduction. Can I thank Professor Habib for his paper and the work that you collectively have done? And can I take a moment just to acknowledge Minister Wood, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the High Commissioner, ambassadors, professors, and very distinguished participants. Can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land here in Australia, and particularly the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation where I am at this time, and our friends from Bangladesh, particularly given this your 50th anniversary year, and I acknowledge your very distinguished leadership. I must say it's been an exceedingly insightful evening, and I must say in addition that I have been particularly impressed with the paper that you have introduced, because it does quantify, and when you look at it and you read it, as I have, and you see the impact that this displacement has had, you appreciate that the idea that compensation could be paid, and that it is as minuscule as it is identified, given the numbers of people that have been dislocated and displaced. I think that it's helpful in terms of the debate about where we are. I must say that I do hope that there will be, through the international system, the International Criminal Court, and the prosecutions that are being pressed there, some action taken. I note that there are young Burmese that have participated in the forces, that have gone to give evidence themselves of the activities in which they are engaged. And I think that it's hard to find evidence of that sort being introduced and being discussed in the way in which it will. And I certainly hope that the international community will become seized of the importance of acting on these issues. I did in terms of the earlier debate, want to pick up one comment from Professor Ibn Hamad. He called for more global Rohingya population coordinated leadership. I have to say that in my experience, the Rohingya leadership is particularly robust. It is international, and I have been party to numbers of activities that they have arranged, and I declare that as an interest, where I have participated in international forums, where I've been to the UN, and from my point of view, they also took me to Cox's Bazar to actually see firsthand what has happened. And I would say that the Rohingya are a particularly, I won't use the word accommodating, but they have behaved under extraordinary provocation with great restraint. And I look at these situations around the world and I say sometimes you need to be careful what you wish for, because the marginalisation of that population is something that in other environments would excite very, very much more robust and difficult responses. And I think the Rohingya have been extraordinarily accommodating and have suffered enormously, and that they need very strong support and respect in that context. You mentioned some of my previous roles. I have spent a lot of time with the UNHCR. I have been to and seen refugee situations around the world. I recognise that we have something of the order of 90 million or more people displaced at this time, more than we've ever seen in the world's history. More than or up to 30 million people found to be refugees. I mean, this is a situation that cannot, by the world community, continue to be accommodated. And when I look at the countries that actually resettle people, they are few and far between. And if you look at the numbers of people that might be resettled by those countries that do it, you're looking at about 100,000 people per annum. These issues are not going to be addressed unless people can return home in safety and dignity and with respect to resume their lives where they are a part of the community, acknowledging their cultural differences, their religious differences, but committed to working together in a unitary state which respects the rule of law. And this is what I would like to see in Myanmar. They have something of the order of 53 million people. And we're talking about 1.1 million Rohingya. It is not a significant proportion of their population. The history that is outlined in the paper that is before us tonight about how long the Rohingya have been part of this nation is clear and unambiguous. They are not just residents, they are citizens. That is what they ask for. And it is not unreasonable that they should have it. I see this paper articulating that particularly well. But I do want to say to the international community, and I can't speak for Australia, I've been away from a leadership role for some time. I do not speak for the Australian government when I make these observations. But we have demonstrated here in Australia, you can have 25% of your population overseas born, with different cultures, different religions, but you can function effectively as a unity state, observing parliamentary democracy and the rule of law, where you respect each other's diversity. In my role, chairing the panel on religious freedom, I know that there is effective international law that allows people with different beliefs to be able to come together and function effectively as a nation state while respecting their diversity. This is what we should be able to see in Myanmar. I am disappointed that the international community, through particularly the UN and the UN Security Council, cannot secure this outcome. I do look very critically at China and its role, because the Rohingya fought against the Japanese at the time when China itself was occupied by Japan. There ought to be a recognition that they have shared interests. And I would like to think that in our region, countries like India, Japan, Australia, and all of those who are part of ASEAN can come together to say, we are better than this. So I do thank our friends for preparing this paper, for articulating the case, but for also indicating very clearly that the costs that ought to be met are such that these people should be able to resume their lives in dignity, in security, with reasonable compensation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ruddock. We welcome your comments. Our next discussant is Andrew B. Lowenstein, International Litigation and Arbitration, Foley Hyde, LLP, Boston. Mr. Lowenstein is a partner with the International Litigation and Arbitration Department of that legal firm, where he represents states before the International Court of Justice, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and also arbitral tribunals. He is an expert on public international law. He was the counsel for the Gambia in the case that it brought against Myanmar under the Genocide Convention, and is part of the team that secured the court's historic decision in January this year, ordering Myanmar not to engage in further acts of genocide and to preserve evidence of the crimes committed against the Rohingya. We only have 5 minutes, I'm afraid, Mr. Lowenstein, but we'd really welcome your thoughts.
Well, thank you very much, and let me thank the organizers of this very important discussion. As you can appreciate, issues of compensation and reparation are at the forefront of the case that the Gambia has brought before the International Court of Justice for Myanmar's serial breaches of the Genocide Convention. Let me also pay tribute to the government and people of Bangladesh. You cannot go to Bangladesh or Cox's Bazar without being inspired by the extraordinary generosity that the Bangladeshi government and Bangladeshi people have shown. In circumstances where one could easily lose hope in humanity, the extraordinary generosity of the Bangladeshi people goes a long way towards restoring that faith in humanity. Let me also pay tribute to our friends and colleagues in the Rohingya community who have been such crucial partners in this endeavor. The danger is always greatest when those who would perpetrate crimes think nobody is watching. And the determination of those in the Rohingya community to insist that the world pay attention is of the most greatest importance. And I just want to commend and thank and encourage them to continue doing that. Your work is of the highest importance. As was mentioned, I serve as counsel to the Gambia in the case that is brought under the Genocide Convention against Myanmar. Though today I will be speaking in my personal capacity, though I hope you will understand that given my role as counsel, I will be somewhat constrained in what I can say. But that being said, I would like to discuss issues of compensation and reparations in international law as they relate to proceedings before the International Court of Justice and proceedings under the Genocide Convention, as is the case with the proceedings that have been initiated by the Gambia. The application that the Gambia filed before the court in November of last year asked for several different modes of remedies. The first is that the court adjudicate and declare that Myanmar has breached fundamental obligations under the Genocide Convention, including that Myanmar has breached its obligations by committing genocide against the Rohingya people, that it has failed to prevent acts of genocide, and that it has also failed to investigate and punish those who are responsible for acts of genocide. Those issues will be litigated over the coming years. The Gambia is due to present its full submission on the merits in October of this year. Myanmar will then have 9 months to respond, and then if the court so desires, there will be a second round of written pleadings before an oral proceeding before the court. As you can imagine, issues of reparation and compensation are key to the proceedings before the court. And I'll just say a few words in the short time I have available to discuss some of those issues. Under international law, a state that has breached its obligations under international law is obligated to make full reparation to repair that breach. So what does that mean in the context of this case? First and foremost, it means that Myanmar is obligated as a matter of international law to make full reparation to the victims of the genocide. More particularly, that would require that Myanmar permit the return of the Rohingya population to Myanmar and to allow them to return in conditions that are safe, that respect their dignity, that ensure full respect for their rights to citizenship in Myanmar, and that do not permit any further acts of discrimination or persecution. It also requires that restitution be made to the victims of genocide. That takes a number of different forms. It would include, for instance, restitution for the confiscation of property that Myanmar has perpetrated against members of the Rohingya community. And I'll just add a small footnote here that in addition to the absolutely horrific acts of violence that has been committed against the Rohingya, there has been, in the aftermath of the clearance operations, a massive wholesale program of confiscating Rohingya lands. That needs to be reversed. There's an obligation under international law to provide restitution for breaches of international law. That would include the restitution of Rohingya property. And then, of course, there's an obligation to provide compensation to those victims of the acts of genocide that have been perpetrated. That includes losses for the physical violence, the emotional and mental harm that has been committed, as well as compensation for other forms of damage that have been inflicted on the Rohingya community. I'll just say a few words very briefly about the process by which these types of remediary issues will be litigated before the court. As I mentioned, we are in the process of litigating the merits of the dispute. And right now the parties are in the process of exchanging their written pleadings. After that process is completed, and should the court ultimately adjudge that genocide has been committed against the Rohingya, then if past precedent is any guide, the court would schedule a second phase of proceedings in which these issues of compensation and reparations would be litigated after a prior determination of responsibility on the merits. I think given the limitations of time, I will stop there. But again, I thank the organizers for allowing these very important issues to be discussed in this forum.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenstein, and thank you to all our discussants for staying with us since we're running so late. Third discussant is Ambassador Sophia Rahman, the Bangladesh High Commissioner to Australia and former ambassador to Myanmar. Mr. Rahman, your microphone is off.
Thank you, Professor Job. Taking the cue from where our friend Lowenstein has stopped. I think I will start from there. Now we have this report that our dear friends have brought out to quantify the reparations in the form of compensation. But equally important aspects, we should not be oblivious of those aspects of remedy and restoration in the political aspects of those, and as well as the administrative aspects of those, which are equally important. Myanmar in the last 3 years have done nothing to restore normalcy in Rakhine and reverse the discriminatory practices and policies, which are very important. The structural causes of discrimination still remains, and the insecurity is heightened. So it is in that kind of a situation, we have to keep our focus on remedial measures in general and demand a couple of things, like we should be continuously demanding the review and reform of laws, all kind of laws that are discriminatory to this community, and particularly the 1982 citizenship law that makes the community stateless. But in that also, beyond the constitutional aspects, there could be even administrative aspects of resolving this issue, like inclusion of the Rohingya community in the 135 indigenous race itself is an administrative matter. We may not revisit the constitution to do that. A simple administrative matter can resolve this issue of that inclusion in that list, and by doing so, they would create, they will get a pathway towards citizenship. So it's a question of political will. Now, number 3, this innumerable local restrictions and unwritten practices that affect the Rohingyas' freedom of movement. That is an important issue. And our friend Wakaruddin talked about national verification process. And these are the things that we'll have to address as we try to see that their rights are restored in full. We have seen Myanmar's accountability process. There are many. We cannot even keep count of them. But they have neither been adequate nor capable. They have failed to prove their interdependence and their neutrality. And they barely followed international standards of due process, of fairness and impartiality. Whatever has come out thus far doesn't indicate anything of the sort of restoration, reparation, and compensation. So that makes this discussion very relevant. And what our friend Lowenstein has said, that when we go to the post-merit stage, if we can go that far, I think these would be important aspects. So in that context of quantification of compensation, that part of the reparation, on this present study, I have a couple of comments. I have noted that the authors have revised the cost somewhat on the land and reclaiming the land for agriculture use, and likewise compensation for injury and trauma. But still, I think these standards are mostly Myanmar's own standard, and it has to be at least at the regional standard to be able to make an impact. Otherwise, this will remain in the realm of satisfaction for the Rohingya community, who has suffered so much and is suffering without any hope for getting any inclusion in the Myanmar society. There is another aspect that we have not seen your study covering is the cases of the IDP camps. We have focused mostly on the people in the Bangladesh side, but the people who are inside Myanmar in IDP camps of 130,000 and another 450,000, maybe 500,000 in open villages cut off from the outside world. So their cases will have to be also examined to understand their losses. They have been suffering since 2012. So the loss of employment to all kind of losses that you have calculated for the Rohingya community in the Bangladesh side of the border has to be recalculated and included in an assessment like this. Otherwise, these will be in a very small demand on Myanmar, which will be not meeting the requirements of the community as a whole. And then we have the various kinds of violences that we see, and the costs related to those violences from 2012, 2016, and 17 will have to be also added to this. you cannot simply start the day from 2017. There are other violences and there are other losses. So somebody should also go into that and try to make an assessment of that. Let me also say something about the loss that has been accrued by Bangladesh. There is a very short cursory examination of this issue in the present study. It's not the way of this is making it, but it's a way of clarification. I'm saying this, that this is something different. Loss and damage borne by Bangladesh is a much wider subject and merit an in-depth separate study. It has got administrative, economic, environmental, even social and cultural components to it. Mobilization of security apparatus in the Bangladesh side for monitoring the situation, maintenance of law and order is very important, and combating transboundary crimes are very significant, and these have tremendous cost to it. Myanmar Army's mobilization in Rakhine and Chain State, earlier and even now in the recent weeks, also require careful positioning of Bangladesh defense forces. That also entail cost, and it's a sunk cost. So these are the costs that Bangladesh is bearing. Then we have other kind of costs, which will be extremely difficult to quantify. Like Rohingya deportation impacted Bangladesh's own nation building to some extent. It has impacted Bangladesh's external economic and diplomatic engagement. It has cost. It has dented Bangladesh's sincere efforts to improve bilateral relations with Myanmar at a cost. It has also created stress in Bangladesh's bilateral relations with many important countries that seek to condone Myanmar's wrongful conduct for whatever reasons. So these are costs, and these will be at some point of time should also be brought in into the game. But for that, I think we need to have a much deeper examination of the subject. So I won't go beyond this at this point of time. But this study, while we appreciate it, is, in my understanding, at a very lower side of the estimate. It creates the floor, but we are yet to see the ceiling of it. Thank you.
Thanks, and thank you for your comments, Mr. Rahman. And we appreciate your support for that research. Our fourth discussant is Dr. Azim Ibrahim, who's patiently stayed with us. He is the Director, Displacement and Migration Program, Center for Global Policy, Washington, DC. He is a research professor at the Strategic Studies Institute, US Army War College, and a director at the Center for Global Policy in Washington, DC. He received his PhD from the University of Cambridge and then completed fellowships at Oxford, Harvard, and Yale. He has advised over half a dozen of the world's leaders on strategy and policy development, most recently as the strategic policy advisor to the chairman of Pakistan's PTI party, Prime Minister Imran Khan. Welcome, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Job, and thanks so much to the organisers for putting this event together. I won't take up too much of your time. I'm very cognizant that we are running late, and we also have some excellent voices on this webinar, particularly Rohingya voices, which I believe should be given prominence in discussions such as this. I'd just like to make a few points. I think there has been significant developments since this entire crisis erupted, now many years ago, particularly the ICJ action, which has probably been one of the most important developments when we had a unanimous decision from 17 judges to recognise not necessarily the genocide, but recognise the shameful action of Myanmar and put restrictions on them from furthering the genocidal kind of policies. And also there's been developments in the ICC, which are obviously very positive as well. But at the same time, despite these developments in the legal front, I should also like to point out that for the Rohingya on the ground, whether it's in Myanmar or whether it's in Bangladesh or elsewhere, nothing has fundamentally changed. Their lives have actually been static and have been stuck. And in many respects, they have also gotten worse. particularly when there are now discussions of moving large swaths of them to an uninhabitable island like Bhasan Char. So I think a considerable effort should be put on in terms of how we can try to improve the lives of those Rohingya that are still on the ground in these various places. And I've listened very interestingly to many of the discussions that are happening on compensation and safe zones, etc. And these are very important discussions to have at this time. But the probability as the situation stands of the Rohingya going back to Myanmar is very slim. The Myanmar authorities have spent the last 50 years, half a century, trying to get rid of these people. And now that they have finally succeeded, they are not going to buckle very easily. We must recall that when the Rohingya were expelled over the border into Bangladesh, Myanmar very swiftly not only burnt their villages, bulldozed their houses, and the land has already been redistributed to the local Rakhine to ensure that the facts on the ground have changed. They further mined the border to make sure that none of the Rohingya can come back. So they are not going to be very conducive to taking back the Rohingya. And as the situation stands, there's almost very little pressure on Myanmar to change its behaviour. And I believe that there's three principal reasons for this. First of all, my interaction with various policymakers in the US and elsewhere still confirms to me that there is this myth of a military coup in Myanmar. So this is a myth that's been perpetuated by Aung San Suu Kyi and her supporters, that look, Myanmar is a fragile democracy. It is flawed, it is fragile, but it's moving in the right direction. And the last thing we want is to put pressure on the democratic and military leadership in case that the military undertake a coup and come back to power. And this is a myth simply because the military are in a perfect situation at the moment in Myanmar. They have the holy grail of politics, which is power without any accountability whatsoever. With the current setup, they can engage in looting the country, they can engage in corruption, they can engage in genocide, not just against the Rohingya, but other ethnic minority groups without any accountability. And the last thing they want to do is come back to power and invite international sanctions on them. There's also the fact that Myanmar, particularly Aung San Suu Kyi's government, is very adept at looking busy, at looking and commissioning new inquiries, new studies into why the Rohingya have actually been expelled. I've met a number of experts and policymakers who have met with Aung San Suu Kyi personally, and they come away being bamboozled by her. She's very articulate, she's Oxford educated, she's very softly spoken, and she tells them that, look, these situations are very complicated, they have been going on for decades, we are trying to understand what's going on, there's suspicion on both sides, there's difficulty on both sides, and we need to get to the bottom of it. Hence why she commissioned somebody like Kofi Annan, one of the world's leading diplomats, to undertake a study. And so she looks very busy, that she's trying to commission and understand this problem. So many people that meet with her, that engage with her, they come away thinking, well, she's doing the best that she possibly can. So I believe that that's the second reason. And there's also the fact that we have elections this year. And so far, Myanmar does not meet, I think, what most people define as the international definition of a democracy, with 25% of seats already allocated to the military, and the military already controlling many of the major ministries within the government. Most people would not classify that as a democracy. And this is despite the fact that many ethnic minorities, just not the Rohingya, have been prohibited, not just from standing in election, but also just voting, let alone. And I think the pressure on this now falls on the international community to say that unless these various changes are made, unless minority groups like the Rohingya are able to participate in the election, and I'm referring here to the Rohingya not just in Myanmar, but also those that have been expelled into Bangladesh, then this election, we will simply not recognise this election result. And the onus on this really falls upon the United States and the European Union. The European Union is in fact funding most of the electoral process. From 2017 to 2020, the European Union has donated over 700 million euros to Myanmar, despite the fact that the NLD came to power to spread the democratic mandate, but instead they have restricted the democratic franchise and have actually adopted policies which are alien too many democracies, including extending press restrictions, targeting minority groups, discrimination, propaganda against minority groups. And so I would conclude by saying that I think that the key thing I would say that countries around the globe really need to examine is to look at the fact that the door has now been opened by the Gambia with this ICJ action, and I think countries now really need to come on board to support it. I think the most surprising thing for me, and as somebody who's been following this issue very closely, is that why did it take the Gambia to actually undertake this action? Why did it take a small African country that has no interest, doesn't even have a diplomatic mission in all of Asia, to undertake this action, when it was clear that this action was available and it did exist? You know, over a couple of years ago, most people had no idea of the difference between the ICC and the ICJ. Now everybody understands this difference, but why did it take the Gambia? Why did it not take other countries who are actually the architects of the Genocide Convention to initiate this action? But now that the door has now been opened by the Gambia, the onus now falls on all other Western countries to join this action, all of the signatories to the Genocide Convention. I understand that Canada and the Netherlands have indicated interest in joining, and this is most welcome. But what will all the other countries? Because I firmly believe that if this action fails or collapses, then this will be the end of the Genocide Convention. I think we really need to, as a global community, then re-examine the 1948 Convention, because I believe it will simply be dead, because there's never been a clearer case of genocide from what I have studied. And so if other countries are unwilling to really take a stand and say never again, then I think we should just put the Genocide Convention to bed and re-examine where we stand. The final point I would like to make is about the Rohingya global leadership. And this was a point that was made earlier by one of the speakers. I think this is an extremely, extremely important proposition for the facilitation of a central global leadership, possibly a leadership in exile, you know, council of experts or whatever form it might take. I have met with my local congresswoman here in the United States when she was visiting Myanmar to meet Aung San Suu Kyi. One of the things she asked me is she wanted to meet with the Rohingya leadership before she left, and there clearly isn't a single Rohingya leadership, and that is not necessarily the fault of the Rohingya themselves, but I do think there has to be much clearer global coordination for the Rohingya to speak with one voice, for the Rohingya to have a council of leadership, not just to engage with Western policymakers, but also to have a seat at the table of any negotiations with Myanmar and Bangladesh. Many of these changes that the Rohingya aspire to are not going to come suddenly. There will be very, very small step changes. And this requires nuance, this requires discussions, and this requires engagement with Myanmar diplomats. Now, many Rohingya may find that extremely unsavory, but this is the reality that you live in, is that you have to discuss and engage and bring about these changes in a coherent and realistic fashion. So I will leave it at that, and I'll pass it back to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim. Really direct points there you make. We appreciate you being so frank. So now we do have a representative from the Rohingya, Mr. Tun Kin, President of the Burmese Rohingya Organisation UK. He is one of the founding members and the current president of this organisation, which has been leading the world in the voice for Rohingya. He first spoke on the issue at the US Congress in 2010 and has briefed many officials on continuing human rights violations that have been continuing. Mr. Tun Kin, you have the floor. Don't forget to turn your mic on. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me to take part in this important webinar today. I would like to express many thanks to Brother Muhyiddin Habib and all other organizers, holding timely this event. You know, I have been invited to talk about compensation for the displaced, and compensation is needed, part of the justice Rohingya deserve for the crime they have suffered, for the crime they keep suffering. You know, let me remind you, this is ongoing genocide. The crime against Rohingyas are ongoing. They are not in the past, actually, they are happening right now. But let me start by saying this: compensation is one part, but it cannot be a standalone part. It needs to be part of a wider move, justice for the Rohingya people. You know, I have visited many times to the camps. When I visited in 2017, just after attacks started on Rohingya, I spent 4 weeks. And, you know, one thing particularly unitedly I heard from them over and over again, and we want justice. Without justice, we will not return. This cannot be ignored. Financial compensation is part of that justice, I can say, but it is part, not a solution in itself. So let me start talking international justice mechanism a bit. There are some significant developments, some of our brother Zim Ibrahim and others mentioned about it. First, you know, ICJ case brought by the Gambia, by the OIC, and now also in Netherlands and Canada. This is such a landmark moment for Rohingya. The first time the crime against us has been acknowledged by international court. You know, Myanmar must adhere to the provisional measure laid down by the court, and ICJ should make Myanmar's report to the court public to help with accountability. Real international pressure is needed with accountability. I just want to point out about it. More countries should join with the Gambia in the case, you know, to increase pressure on Myanmar. International community has to play really important role. Secondly, we have seen that we can see that ICC case on forced deportation of Rohingya moving forward. Then the news last week of 2 Tamador soldiers being heard by ICC is important, and I don't think they would have brought them to The Hague without ICC having corroborated, you know, their statements. This could be a crucial in the case against Myanmar government and military. So it is a sign that things are moving forward. On bringing 2 soldiers to The Hague, I would like to express many thanks who supported that and who make it happen. You know, thirdly, we have a universal jurisdiction case where our Burmese Rohingya organization filed in Argentina. I believe that this case will move forward very soon. We are looking forward to hear in a few weeks' time something positive. You know, the ruling, you know, the historic investigation against Myanmar military and civilian leadership over the genocide against Rohingya people, that universal jurisdiction case will bring closer to what big things most want to see. That the architects of the genocide against Rohingya face a court of law. We are convinced that the case with Argentina will only complement and strengthen other international justice efforts, not undermine them. Before I move on compensation, let me say a few words that, you know, ICOE, Independent Commission of Inquiry, Myanmar government, this is one in a long row Burmese Inquiries Commission used to stall international justice and will never lead to any accountability for the crimes committed. So let me just talk about compensation, you know, before my time is up. I know its time is too short. Of course, this is vital, absolute necessity. The international community need to support us on this, need to push for this. When the Rohingya return to their villages, you know, their homeland in Myanmar, a full citizenship, how can we start our life? They've been destroyed everything. They destroyed our home, you know, they destroy our land. They, you know, let me tell you, one Rohingya I met in Bangladesh, he owned $75,000 worth of land. He left everything. When I asked him, he is just sleeping under, you know, in a muddy place with the plastic, and he was totally, you know, he's totally, he cannot speak anything about it. He just cried and he totally kind of helpless. He tell, I cannot go back because there is safety, security, these are more important. And so I have many Rohingya I met. We Rohingya, we have our own culture, our civilization, we have our land. That's land being taken away by Burmese government, you know. Our shops been destroyed. So as a community, we are a manageable minority. We are not the people from like a roadside. We are 4 million people, population, you know, 80% population have left out from the country because of continued crimes and genocide against our people by the Burmese military and the government. So we should have minimum respect, you know, ability to stand up when we can return our place with the rights. Of course, compensation is needed. Without compensation, how can you build your community? How can you build your children in a community? That is very important. Look at like Bosnia and Sudan. You know, there are 3 ways of compensation: through UNHCR assistance, one compensation like they have to give lost assets, whatever our shops, our homes been destroyed, those assets need to be compensated. And another part is reparation, making Myanmar government accountable. You know, international community have to pressure on this. Otherwise, Burmese government will be successing their policy to destroy our community. That is very important. And finally, I want to point out that if you don't have a community of financial ability, how can you stand up, bring back our life, bring back our community? We want to see our community in Arakan, our land, where we belong to, where we brought up. That is the land where our forefathers been there. So without compensation, you know, injustice part compensation is needed. Without compensation, there is, you know, not is not actually fulfilled when we talk about justice. I really appreciate again to the organizers, especially here, Brother Muhyiddin Habib, your presentation, your great work, and also I would like to express many thanks again to all the speakers joining us in solidarity with us. I believe that we can move forward from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tun Kin. I think we've worn everybody out because there's very little questions to be answered. But mostly the Q&A relates to boycotting Myanmar, imposing targeted sanctions against Myanmar, and removing the economic incentive for genocide. But I suspect if we had time and discussed it more, it's really the countries that keep appearing, Japan, India, and China, that take most of these, would be most responsible for imposing a boycott. So now I'd like to, in the interest of time, cut the discussion. I think we've all had enough. Yeah.
Excuse me, Christine. I think we have one more, Ms. Wai Nu, who's present.
Oh, sorry.
That's Oprah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes. Yes, one more. Wai Nu, a political activist. She's a Burmese activist who advocates for the rights and equality of all people in Myanmar, including the Rohingya. When Wai Nu was 18 years old in 2005, her parents and all their children were arrested. She was listed as one of the BBC 100 women in 2014. And in 2017, she was named Time magazine's Next Generation Leaders, one of them. She is also a Hillary Clinton awardee. She has founded 2 non-government organizations, and she focuses on peace building in Myanmar. Please accept my apology, Ms. Nu, for leaving you out. Please, would you make a few comments?
Totally. Thank you very much, Professor Christine, for your kind introduction. It's an absolute honor to be part of this discussion. Thank you so much to the organizer for giving me this opportunity. First, I would like to express my deep gratitude and thanks to the Bangladesh government and the people of Bangladesh for your kindness, humanity, and generosity to our people. And I also like to acknowledge our brothers and sisters living in Bangladesh, especially the women victims of sexual violence and those victims who suffered gross, severe form of violence. I am, given the time limitations and all the great speakers has already discussed many points, so I'll just be very brief and perhaps repeat a couple of points that I feel important. To start off, I would like to remind 3 clear concerns and asks from the Rohingya refugees regarding return and repatriations, which are full citizenship, return to their places of origin, safety and security. When we say full citizenship, restorations of birth citizenship with the recognitions of our ethnic identity, Rohingya. And secondly, when we talk about return to the places of origin, it's restitutions of our land, be able to go back to our villages. And thirdly, when we talk about safety and security, it's mean having a free and dignified life without having any, without living under any surveillance or confinement. So people don't want to go back to another confinement condition. So these are 3 clear, loud asks from the refugees. And all the discussions and solutions has to reflect these calls and these concerns. That's the most important thing. And when we talk about compensations, yes, it is an imperative element of a reparation, and it should just be a form of reparations in a larger reparations with a holistic approach to respond or to respond to the violations of their rights, as Gotonkin and Mr. Andrew explained. And it should also be done in a way it's flexible and flexible, and victims have a choice to make. Because it is crucial to recognize not Rohingya might want to accept the financial compensation, especially when it's come to the land. And there is a risk to that too. And some Rohingya, most Rohingya simply wanted to return to their land and perhaps compensated for their material damages and received a compensation to rebuild their life. The land issue is very crucial in this entire campaign. And I think it is very difficult to quantify with the current market value, because it has ancestral connections and communal connections, as well as it has values on social, economic values, and it has a value of heritage and identity and all other complexity behind it. So it will be really challenging to quantify. Let's say, Dr. Habib, when we quantify average compensation for the Rohingya land as $2,500 US. It can be spent in 1 year, but the land that owned by the Rohingya, it's traditionally has been used for farming and income generation purposes in their entire life. So if the value of land cannot be quantified easily, and it must be restituted. As we also understand, the Burmese government, one of the primary objectives might have been removing Rohingya from their land and taking their land. So that's one point that I would like to highlight, while we acknowledge that the financial compensations part is important, as Ko-Tung mentioned earlier. And second point is that the participations of the victims in the reparations processes, or even in the discussions around the compensations, participations of the victims is crucial, including women and other vulnerable groups among the refugee, because oftentimes women are more in a vulnerable position to prove their loss. So it is crucial that we include them in any processes, and also because there's a questions of individual loss, as well as the collective loss has to be addressed. So it is important to have a victim-centric approach, the participations of the victims, and understanding what they want from the beginning is crucial. Otherwise, any premature discussions or discussions around compensation may misdirect the situations and remove attentions away from the actual desire of the victims. We also need to understand that we don't want to send, or our people don't want to go back to this controversial model villages that the Burmese government built recently under the continuations of their agenda, the policies against Rohingya. And it is really important that these discussions are thoroughly done with the participations and involvement of refugees and victims themselves, because otherwise it can misdirect, and it's really concerning. And I would also like to say that we must acknowledge, we do, I just want to remind that Rohingya had right to land, and which was taken away illegally as a process in this whole genocidal campaign. And so, I just want to end saying that the Rohingyas are the ones who understand their situation the most, and they live and who had the most experience of living in Myanmar and dealing with the Burmese government. So their understanding and their knowledge must be taken seriously to have a sustainable solutions, and so that we may avoid recurrence of the crime. In short, Rohingya has the right to a free, prior and informed consent. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to receive any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Ms. New. One other suggestion now in the chat is that Aung San Suu Kyi be stripped of her Nobel Prize. There's other comments there you might choose to read yourselves in the chat. So now I need to pass to Professor Henri Pollard to make the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Professor Jubb. We've heard a lot today. I think that has been really interesting and challenging to try to move this issue forward. Perhaps I would like to, what I take out from this is how human rights of the Rohingya in this particular case have been unable to constrain an exercise of arbitrary power, in this case of the government, and the raison d'etre, if you wish, of human rights is essentially to constrain the exercise of power by government. And that has led us into the situation of trying to find remedies for the situation which these people now find themselves, and of reparation of the consequences of some of the challenges that that raises. And so for closing remarks, I would like to first call upon Mr. Saiful Alam, the president of the Bangladesh National Press Club and editor of the Daily Jugantor, and Mr. Saiful is a well-respected leader and journalist in Bangladesh. He is the current president of the Bangladesh National Press Club and the editor-in-chief of the, as I said, of the Daily Angor. Thank you. Oh, and I'm told that he's not here, so we will move on to Mr. Hamid, the president of the Institution of Diploma Engineers of Bangladesh. The Institution of Diploma Engineers of Bangladesh is the largest professional organization of Bangladesh. He's also the director of Dhaka Wasa and the director of the Power Grid Company of Bangladesh, and a member of the National Water Council and many other committees. He's a founder, joint secretary, and served 28 years general secretary of the national largest professional organization. And with his dynamic leadership, the IDB has taken historical decision to join the Great Liberation War of Bangladesh. He's the editor, and we could continue on with his accomplishments and what he's done, but particularly also we have to recognize the role of the IDEB in funding and making this project possible, this large-scale study that we are undertaking on the Rohingya refugees. So thank you very much, Mr. Hamid, and I'll turn the floor over to you for a few moments for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, respected moderator, Dr. Henry. Thank you very much for your giving me that opportunity to talk to you. This is good evening from Bangladesh, and good morning for other country, and good afternoon for some country. We acknowledge and pay respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island nation across the Australia, their elders, ancestors, culture and heritage. As a gesture to pay respect to martyr of the language movement and the 1971 Liberation War, and our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and his family. We are happy to see the Honorable Mr. John Wood, MP and Assistant Minister, Government of Australia, and Honorable Mr. Shahriar Alam, MP, State Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh Government, and Mr. Masood bin Momen, Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Bangladesh, distinguished keynote speakers, panel members, and distinguished discussant and audience from all over the world. Today's topic has particular significance to Bangladesh and the regional economy and long-term security and political stability of the South Asia region. I think the organizer, Dr. Mohsin Habib, Professor Christine Jab, Professor Henry, for organizing this important event and bridging together world's experts in this issue. Thank you very much for organizing this event. In short remarks, I can say that the Rohingya have been forced through ethnic cleansing, genocide, and sustained decade of economic, social, and political exclusion by Myanmar. The bitter history of the violence is tracing back to at least 1784, when Buddhist king conquered this region. IDB is the largest professional organization in Bangladesh, take particular pride in supporting the research endeavor taken forward by Professor Christine Job, and Dr. Henry, and Dr. Mohsin. This research team has stepped away from the traditional approach and applied rigorous scientific research in the studying the levels of experienced by Rohingya people. And this approach is qualifying the compensation for the Rohingya people is the first of its kind of research in Rohingya people. I hope, and like the previous examination by ICC will proceed with the holding of Myanmar accountable for this crime against humanity and adequately compensate the Rohingya people for re-establishing their original state of life in Myanmar. IDB is committed to continuing the financial and logistical support for this research into the future, and would like to invite others to come forward to support this important work. Thank you very much, Honorable Moderator. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining this effort, joining this event. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hamid, for that generous support and your commitment to further support this ongoing work. We are, on behalf of the research team, and certainly on behalf of all the participants today, I want to recognize our profound gratitude for this very selfless gesture on your part and on the part of the Institute of Diploma Engineers, Bangladesh. Thank you very much. I now want to turn to Mr. Kamrul Talafdar, President and CEO of the ASA Philippines Foundation. He co-founded the ASA Philippines Foundation right after his UNDP assignment in August 2004, where he served as Chief Consultant Philippines for Microfinance. He has a large experience in South and Southeast Asian countries in microfinance, and he's profoundly involved in assisting people in conflict zones and war victims through relief and rehabilitation efforts. He has been extensively involved in calamity impacted areas, and also I want to note that the ASA Foundation has Philippine Foundation has been a funder of this research project, and I want to take this opportunity to recognize that and to express again on the part of the researchers a profound gratitude for this coming together with the IDB Foundation, the IDB engineers to make this possible. And I'll turn the floor over to to Mr. Kamrul Tofter. Thank you. Hello, Cameroon.
Yeah.
Can you? Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. Good evening, and thank you so much, Professor Pollard, for very generous introduction. I am thankful that all of you consider us, the Philippines, as a partner of this great endeavor. But I wanted to thank three very good friend of mine, Professor Christine Job, Marcin Habib, and yourself, for your extraordinary bold step, persistently exposing the ethnic cleansing by Myanmar to Rohingya minorities. I'm a couple of years with you in this endeavor. Thanks to Ambassador Sufi Rahman for his vast knowledge and passion to talk on Rohingya issues is indeed extraordinary. Almost every single speakers today have mentioned that the genocide and persecution of Rohingya minorities and destruction of their properties and life is unprecedented in modern history. Talking about Rohingya is a humanitarian reason. We need to talk about this because we are human with conscience. We are setting example before our next generations to uphold human dignity, equitable justice, and fairness when we will not be around. Our next generation would follow our footsteps and set better example to make this world a better place for all human beings. If we have no means to prevent an injustice at that magnitude like Rohingya crisis, at least we must voice out that it must stop. Those who have spoke and listened today, at least all of you, will be able to clear your conscience and say to your children and grandchildren that you tried your best to voice out against an horrific act and injustice. Thanks to all dignitaries, speakers, organizing institutions, including Swinburne University, IDB, Bangladesh Research Institute, Laurentian University, OCPR, and OIDA for their great effort today. I'm grateful to all of you for considering us as one of your partners of such a humanitarian cause. I pray all of you continue to this effort relentlessly until the justice is served. ASA Philippines will be happy to be with you always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cameroon, for those words. And also, again, thank you for your ongoing support. It now comes up upon me, first of all, as the Master of Ceremonies, I had the pleasure of opening this conference, and now I get to close this webinar. And I would like to thank everybody, first of all, all of the people who came to attend this webinar. We hope that you found new information here in the presentations, and that you found the discussions interesting, and also that this provided you with some means to go forward in addressing this very important issue of the Rohingya refugees. I just take a few suggestions away from the chat. One was to remove the economic incentive for genocide, and certainly we would need to identify means to do so. Another suggestion was to work towards a boycott of Myanmar products, and certainly those are things that have widespread effect and among the population at large, and tend to raise the visibility of such issues. Another one would be targeted economic sanctions against individuals and corporations who either profit or who are behind this genocide. Well, thank you, everyone. Well, finally, I want to thank the participants, the presenters at today's webinar. Thank you so very much for taking the time to do this and for sharing of your expertise and your knowledge. And I hope that we will meet again to talk about this issue again, but under somewhat better circumstances and a change of situation for the Rohingya people. Thank you very much.